This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Donald Trump needs a weak dollar.
I don't hear too many bullish cases for China in 2025.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Trump took steps on everything from TikTok to the southern border.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Lisa Mateo. The return of Michael Barr.
Yep, absolutely.
We're all here together today. It's a good thing to be here. A little bit of warmer weather in New York, away from the really frigid cold that we've had recently. No frigid cold over at Apple. They billed the news from Mark Gurman here. 20 minutes ago, half hour ago. They're going to put some money into Texas.
Yeah, they're going to hire 20,000 new U.S. workers, Tom. Spend $500 billion domestically over the next 4 years. A new server manufacturing plant in Houston, so Texas wins again.
Not semiconductors, but like manufacturing, not fancy stuff as well. We look at the interesting Bloomberg Launchpad this morning, and it's not a lazy Monday. Not only the recovery in the equity markets, but Paul, you're going to get your $69 a barrel.
I think I might.
American oil. We're not there yet.
But WTI crude oil, Tom, $70.48, kind of steady here today, but it's kind of been in this range. But I think Texas, if you're Texas, you're making money here at 70 bucks.
After Scare Friday, the 10-year real yield, I'm going to go to 4 digits because that's what we do on a full-day work week Monday, 2.0085. We did have a cup of sank at 199 in the 10-year real yield, but that really speaks volumes to me. We'll have to see how that plays out with the economic data that we have this week. Great set of people coming up. Holger Schmieding will be with us in the German elections. We start in London with Steve Carroll here in a moment. Bloomberg Surveillance. This morning we're brought to you by BAM Mutual. They insure municipal bonds. BAM Mutual, they insure municipal bonds that finance essential infrastructure and provide guaranteed income to improve any portfolio. Learn more about municipal bond credit quality. Visit bambonds.com. Let me spell that. BAMBONDS, bambonds.com. From the Interactive Broker Studios of Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got futures right now pointing to a higher open. This is after Friday's sell-off. We'll start with NASDAQ futures up 0.3%, 81 points. Dow futures up 0.7%, 315 points. S&P futures up about 0.5% or 30 points. We have the 2-year yield 4.22%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.44%, and that is little changed. After Germany's election results, we have the DAX in Germany right now up about 0.7%. Over to currencies, the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. We have the Japanese yen down 0.2% at 149.67 against the dollar, and the euro up 0.1% at 104.70 against the dollar. Nvidia front and center this week. Investors focus on its growth outlook on Wednesday. Currently leading the gains in the Mag 7 before the open. Its shares are up more than 1%, and that's after sliding about 4% on Friday. Then we turn to another member of the Mag 7. You guys mentioned it. Apple's hiring 20,000 new workers producing AI servers in the U.S. The company's biggest U.S. commitment to date. Its shares, though, they're down about more than 0.5%. And we'll stick with tech. TD Cowen says Microsoft canceling leases for AI data centers in the U.S., potentially reflecting some concerns about overcapacity. Microsoft shares, they're up about 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. I appreciate this morning. The German elections are out. They're 18 hours old ago, and I think everybody knows the story. The Team A that was supposed to win won. Angela Merkel's politics was maybe refuted, but there's a lot more going on here than you would think. We're thrilled to have Holger Schmieding with us later. Kriti Gupta will stop by. But right now, expert on continental history, Stephen Carroll, joins us. He is the star of Bloomberg Daybreak in London.
Yeah, I know.
It's incredible how that works. He's in Berlin. Stephen, for our American audience, over in East Germany, as we knew it as kids, Berlin looks like what we call Madison, Wisconsin. It's this liberal pin drop in an AfD East Germany. With all that you know, Stephen Carroll, what is the ability of AfD, the conservative immigration-led party, what is their ability to expand over the coming months and years?
Well, what we've seen so far is essentially that map, as you say, and if you look at the picture of it with the former East Germany, almost entirely the light blue colour of AfD on our Bloomberg graphics today. And that's actually something that isn't a huge change from the last election. In fact, what has happened in those places, the AfD has increased its support. It's appealing to more voters there. But reaching this level, 1 in 5 voters voting for the AfD, and we should point out that's on the highest turnout in 35 years. These are not disenfranchised voters who can't, only the disengaged ones not going to the polls. This is an exceptionally high turnout for a German election, and 1 in 5 of those voters choosing to vote for the AfD. It is what the polls are predicted, which perhaps tells us that there's no such thing as a shy AfD voter anymore. Pollsters are able to tell how big the support is. Alice Weidel, I was at their election night event last night. She says, the leader of the AfD, she says their ambition is to overtake the Conservative CDU at the next election. And Friedrich Merz, the new Chancellor, is going to be feeling the pressure of what the AfD is pushing, its anti-immigration policies.
Does he need to deport immigrants, particularly after the 3 physical crimes that we saw over the recent months?
Look, before this election, and in fact during the campaign, he put forward a very controversial motion to the Bundestag trying to put essentially that sort of measure in place, being able to deport people whose asylum application had been rejected. That was passed in one iteration with the support of the AfD, which was hugely controversial. The firewall, as it was known in German politics, appeared to have cracks in it. This wasn't a binding motion, but we know that's one of the things that Friedrich Merz campaigned on, is a tighter approach to immigration. Nothing like what the AfD is proposing, but they're moving ever so slowly in the same direction. And that's the area where Alice Weidel and the AfD feel they can pressure Friedrich Merz into taking bolder steps, and they're going to be the biggest opposition party in the Bundestag, so they will have a key voice when it comes to criticising the policies of this government. Friedrich Merz is going to be looking over his shoulder and making sure that AfD support remains in check.
So, Stephen, how does Friedrich Merz form a government, and over what time frame?
So the maths are pretty simple, luckily for us. It's 2 parties. It's the SPD, the Social Democrats, that Olaf Scholz, the outgoing Chancellor, was a member of, even though they had their worst performance in an election since World War II. And this is a party that's been in power for most of the past 3 decades in one form or another. Along with the CDU-CSU alliance led by Friedrich Merz, those 2 parties have a majority in Parliament. So that's simple. These parties have worked together in the past. They now have to sit down and negotiate their detailed government contract. The process here, and I've been discussing this with many of our Bloomberg colleagues based here in Berlin, it's difficult to do quickly because they do really draw up essentially a very detailed marriage contract between the 2 parties going into the next government. That takes time. Friedrich Merz says he wants it done by Easter, so less than 2 months. That'd be pretty quick by German standards. Not much optimism it could be done any faster, despite all of the pressure that we have coming from issues like the threat of tariffs, like the change in the US approach to the war in Ukraine, that urgent action is needed from Berlin.
Stephen Carroll, thank you so much, with Bloomberg Daybreak London from our news bureau in Berlin. Again, Holger Schmieding will join us later. Thrilled to bring Dr. Schmieding to you this morning. Futures up 28. Dow futures bouncing off, what was it, United Healthcare on Friday?
Yeah.
It seems so long ago.
Yep,
up 7/10
exactly.
of a percent. Small stocks doing better today. The VIX exploded, exploded out to an 18 level. It was pretty elegant, actually. It's right off 2 standard deviations. Comes in right now. Why don't you bring in our next guest? He was not on the phone Friday. Say, go to cash.
No.
Go to cash.
No. Robert Teeter joins us. He's the Chief Investment Strategist at Silvercrest Asset Management. Robert, I'm looking at a note from our good friend Torsten Slok over at Apollo, and he's got some data that just shows the concentration in U.S. equities and U.S. big tech relative to the rest of the world is just it's at all-time highs. Is that a concern to you? Because he suggests it might be.
It is a bit of a concern. I think that and where valuations are right now are indicative of the fact that markets are priced for a pretty strong outcome on a lot of fronts, and there are some challenges being presented to that now. One of the things I take a little comfort from in the tech space is that on the year, you have the average tech stock is outperforming the tech index. So there is some rotation within technology, which I think is very healthy. That's the preferred scenario, of course, is that you get the bottom of the index coming up a bit and the top sort of going sideways, as we've seen on most of the year, with the Mag 7 being not quite as strong and the rest of the tech space doing a little better.
And, when Stevie Cohen speaks today, most people want to know what free agent he's bidding for. But he actually did recently, late last week, talk about the market. Even he voiced some serious concerns about this equity market. So, I mean, it seems to be building there, that wall of worry a little bit.
I think it is. You've had a lot of doubt creep in on a variety of fronts, whether it's the Fed moving to what seems to be a very hard pause policy. You have inflation that's been coming down very slowly, so you're not likely to get any support for valuation there. Some of the economic data, while not weak, has been weaker than it has been. And when you have these valuation levels with the S&P trading at 25 times trailing earnings, you really need the good news to come through very strongly. And I would say it's been coming through in a positive way, but not particularly strong. It sort of looks like the month to date and year to date are emblematic of what we'll see on the year, in my view. It's been very choppy, a lot of mixed news. But if you look, we're up 2% on the year, and that seems to be a modest gain, and that's what we've been looking for the year.
This is brilliantly said, because I believe if you're up 2%, the Keene extrapolation would say that's a pop in 20% year. We're addicted to way above vector returns. Do you perceive this as a low double-digit, single-digit future?
I think it's a single-digit year. We've been looking for about 9%, led mainly by earnings.
Which is at least 200, if not 300 beeps over what the math boys say.
Yes. Well, one of the challenges is the starting point on valuation. So my view has been that we'll see a lot of volatility on the valuation front, but we basically hold the line over the course of the year as we get some progress on rates between now and year end. And at the end of the day, earnings deliver. Street had been at about 15%. That's come down. We've been at around 9%. We think modest economic growth, 2%, translates to about 9% on the earnings front. And that's really the recipe we're looking for in the year. Flat valuation, 9% earning gain.
Paul, in our youth, that was like pretty good,
That's
right?
fine. Yeah, I mean,
great.
6, 7, 8, 9%. Healthcare is starting to come to life a little bit. Talk to us about the healthcare space.
It is. We think it's an area that had been very heavily disrupted by the pandemic. Margins had come down quite a bit. They seem to have stabilized here. Profit margins haven't quite improved, but they've stabilized. Typically, that's a good sign of a turning point. They're running, several hundred basis points behind where they were pre-pandemic, so room for some improvement there. And it's a space that seems to be able to capitalize on some of the advancements in AI and robotics in terms of cost structure. And so over the future, we think those margins get back to normal. That's solid earnings gains, and solid earnings gains in a relatively modest economy is a pretty positive spot to be.
Where are you, we talk to economists where they're really focused on the eye on investment and all that, but as a stock guy, as a portfolio guy, do you have an interior confidence in investment in America? Forget about the Apple news and tariffs and that, but does this investment look okay? To me, it does.
It does. I think it's been building for some time since the pandemic. It's not just policy, but desire to control supply chains. Maybe policy will unfold in a way that makes it more favorable to invest in the U.S. on tax and regulatory. But it's a trend that's been in place for several years, and it's just been slowly building, and I don't see that changing anytime soon. It's good for domestic growth in the U.S., and eventually we think it'll be good for the smaller cap space.
On your commute across the nation, Robert Teeter with us, and we continue with him, Chief Investment Strategist at Silvercrest Asset Management. Good morning on YouTube, growing each and every day. Really humbled by the growth of Bloomberg podcasts. Odd Lot's on fire.
Sure.
Tracy Alloway and Joe Weisenthal just killing it out on Bloomberg podcast. Subscribe there to what we do. It's a 5-day work week. Are you ready?
Yep.
I mean, Lisa's she's like 50-50.
Yeah, I know.
I see the Mateo Wednesday. Work from home.
Exactly. What are we doing in the fixed income business, Robert? I mean, yields have come in a little bit, but still the 2-year Treasury, 4.2%. A lot of folks probably feel pretty comfortable there. How about credit risk here? Where are you on the credit spectrum these days?
Very cautious on the credit space. With economic growth decelerating, I don't think it's a major concern, but similar to the equity market, the valuation piece on credit is pretty extraordinary here with where spreads have been, and so we've been very careful on credit risk. I do think rates will trend lower over time. That'll provide a little bit of support, but really careful on the credit space right now.
So in the fixed income space, are you thinking about a 5-year, 10-year on the Treasury? Is that kind of where you want to be?
Yeah, I mean, we're slightly short of benchmark on duration and looking to increase that very gradually over time. We think it will be a really slow path to bring those rates down, mostly with the 10-year following inflation. So again, with the Fed on pause and a lot of the portions of CPI stuck on hold because of where shelter is, it's a long path lower.
Right.
You could get some transition from tariffs where you get a one-time boost higher. So it could take some time for rates to come down.
Remember dollar cost averaging? It was like the mark. It was like a mark. It was like Barron's every other page.
Sure,
dollar cost average. If someone's in cash and they've missed the teeter joy of the last 3 or 4 years, what's the best process to get into the market?
We typically talk to that type of client about establishing several tranches of investment, say 3, for example, so a third at a clip. And in a market like this where you have higher valuations and some chop, you spread those 3 tranches out over time and proceed very slowly. So you do call dollar cost average in. You take a little qualitative view in going a bit slower in a more choppy market and one where valuations are higher. If this were an environment like we saw in the pandemic where valuations were quite low and we felt we were more comfortable to bottom, you move through those 3 tranches much faster, putting the money to work.
Robert Teeter, thank you so much with Silvercrest to get us started on the equity markets this morning. A really wonderful equity moment later on in the show. Michael Wilson of Morgan Stanley will be with us, and then Robert Dahl will be with us. Wilson and Dahl, back to back. Michael, who is it? Is it Michael
Barr? I
Barr?
think, yeah,
With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. President Trump labeled Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky as a dictator for not holding wartime elections since Russia's invasion. Meanwhile, Zelensky, through an interpreter, says he is ready to resign if it would bring peace.
If to achieve peace you really need me to give up my post, I'm ready. I can trade it for NATO if there are such conditions.
Zelensky will meet a dozen leaders from Europe and Canada to mark the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion. Meanwhile, protesters in Paris voicing support for Ukraine ahead of today's meeting between French President Macron and President Trump at the White House. Pope Francis is said to be awake and continuing therapy. Today is the 10th day of his hospitalization for a complex lung infection that has provoked the early stages of kidney failure. He remains in critical condition. In Germany, conservative leader Friedrich Merz emerged as the winner in Sunday's election. According to the preliminary results, Merz's center-right alliance won almost 29% of the vote. This year's Screen Actors Guild Awards were handed out last night in Los Angeles. Conclave won for outstanding performance by a cast in a motion picture. Timothée Chalamet won for lead actor for his work in A Complete Unknown. Demi Moore took home the award for Best Female Actor in a Motion Picture for her performance in The Substance. She talked about the difference it made when she joined SAG.
In 1978, I was 15, almost 16, and it changed my life because it gave me meaning, it gave me purpose, and it gave me direction.
Moore is also nominated for the Academy Award for Best Actress. The Oscars will be handed out on March 2nd. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. Breaking news here. The president up early, 7:17 a.m. is where we get the tweets out from the president. President Trump says, quote, "Thank you, Tim Cook," and Apple, unquote. Says it again. Apple has just announced a record investment in the United States.
Yeah.
In Michigan, in Houston, Texas.
Yep. I'm looking at it right here. Apple announces they're going to hire 20,000 new U.S. workers. They're going to spend $500 billion domestically over the next 4 years, Tom. And that includes a new server manufacturing plant in Houston.
That's the headline.
Yep.
To me, you mentioned that earlier. This server distinction seems to be something that we will study. We'll get more comments on this in the coming hours and days as well. I believe Apple, Lisa, help me here. Apple's down $1 or something, down 1%.
Apple's down 1%, yeah.
You know, it's like there. Did you buy something from Apple this weekend?
I don't think so. I may have gone a whole weekend without buying something from Apple.
Do you know what is at home this weekend?
What's that?
At home this weekend?
Yep.
It was a Guitar Hero home.
Wow.
I banned it for years. Do you have it, Lisa?
It's fun.
I
You don't enjoy
banned
it? Well, I guess,
And
yes, you're
I
a
don't
professional.
do it. I don't do it, but I sit there and they really get the timing down.
Yeah.
They don't know what they're playing on the fretboard. But, you know, afterthoughts,
feel like a pro.
afterthoughts killing it. She's doing right to Nickelback, you know, really good joy there. It's a Guitar Hero weekend. Anyways, we say good morning to all of you. Futures up 30, Dow Futures up 307. Michael Barr with us, returning from a three-island tour. Was the boat packed?
It was packed. It was the Pacific Princess.
Wow, of
It
course.
was, and you saw the plaque with the actors that were in the Love Boat. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And Linda, bless her heart, she drove a dune buggy.
Yeah.
I did not, you know, I said, have you
On
ever...
the boat?
Yeah, no, that would have been a feat. We were in Turks and Caicos, drove a dune buggy. I said, all right, have you ever driven a dune
Now,
buggy?
I got to ask, in your Detroit Lions Speedo, did you go in every pool?
Well, I didn't even go in the pool. I
You
wore my
didn't go in the
jersey, but, you know, I played bingo.
Sure you did.
A few cocktails.
A lot of people said, hey, Barry Sanders, I have my Sanders jersey. The best running back ever.
Yep.
Michael Barr, thank you so much. Good to have you back here. We're all here
Cruising the
together
Caribbean.
this week. I'm going to tear up. It's just too much. And, you know, a lot going on, to say the least. Coming up, Michael, Paul Sweeney growing a beard. Now that the Yankees are growing a beard, we should see a bearded Sweeney
don't want to see
soon.
that.
Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by IBKR. Will the U.S. CPI exceed 2.4% in March 2025? You can trade your prediction at IBKR Forecast Trader. The yes recently at 60%. You can buy yes or no and earn $1 if you're right. Go to IBKR.com/forecast. All right, we've got futures on the mend this morning. This is after the S&P 500's worst session of the year on Friday. Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan said the flight back from U.S. stocks will not last. We'll start with Dow futures. They're up the highest, up 0.7%, 308 points. Nasdaq futures up 0.3%. S&P futures up 0.4%. The 2-year yield 4.22%, up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.44%, and that is little change. To commodities, spot gold $2,947 an ounce. Over to oil, Brent crude $74 a barrel. WTI crude $70 a barrel, and the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little change. In the U.S. this week, the Federal Reserve's preferred measure of inflation, we have core PCE. That's set for Friday. And then another highlight this week, revised fourth quarter economic growth. That's on Thursday. To earnings we go. We'll start with Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. Its cash hoard increased for a 10th quarter to $334.2 billion. That's another record. Operating earnings jumped 71%. You have Class A and B shares up more than 1%. Domino's Pizza down nearly 3%. Their fourth quarter revenue missed estimates. We're still awaiting word from Spirit Airlines. We'll keep you posted on that after the close. It's video conferencing company Zoom Communications. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. In Berlin with Stephen Carroll is Kriti Gupta, and she joins us right now to pick up the debris after the German election. Kriti, I think a lot of people sort of know the outcome here, that Mr. Merz and team won, a refutation of Angela Merkel, and we talked with Stephen Carroll earlier about the very far-right AfD. This is a trend in Europe, and you see it across Eastern Europe, and maybe East Germany is part of Eastern Europe. You see it certainly with Le Pen and all in France. What does this election signal to Nigel Farage in England? I mean, Nigel Farage's party is doing better and better against a clumsy Labour, aren't they?
They absolutely are. You are starting to see that show up in the polls. But Tom, to your point, it's the exact same story in every part of Europe. I could argue it's the same in Spain. It's the same in Italy. Yeah. It's even the same in Belgium, if you're paying attention. This is important because it is at its core. I mean, I hate to say this as a Bloomberg TV journalist here, but this is an economic story. And this is because the cost of living in so many of these places has gotten to a point that their wages haven't risen in tandem. At least in the United States, you've seen wages kind of catch up to inflation, right, and inflation has come down. You're not seeing that in Europe. And on top of that, there has been in the past couple of years a friendly stance on immigration. So the combination of a lack of affordability, right, and immigration has fueled this this rise of the right across Europe.
I mean, I can be a smart guy, folks, and go, well, over to the west of Berlin in Altmark, Geretsauer land, the conservatives won. In one geography over from that to the west, Gifhorn Penny went for the more liberal centrist people. Is that going to happen in England? I mean, Kriti, I'm fascinated by the ability of Farage to, you know, from my sophisticated analysis, outfox the two traditional parties of London. Is that in the cards?
It was in the cards, and I think where I'll say this is perhaps, the UK is perhaps the exception to the trend, is that the Conservative Party in the UK, first with Liz Truss and then, of course, with Rishi Sunak, kind of front-run that trend that you're now seeing show up in France, in Germany, in Italy, etc. And Keir Starmer was kind of the antithesis to that. The argument basically is, if you're unhappy with the economics, if you're unhappy with the immigration, you swing on the opposite side of the political spectrum. You saw that in the United States as well. After Joe Biden, you saw the political spectrum absolutely shift by an enormous margin in the favor of Trump. It's the same concept, the same stories driving the UK, unhappy with the conservative government, unhappy with the affordability, so they shifted to the political spectrum. The difference, however, is that in the UK, the conservative government is known for cutting taxes, and the Labour government isn't. I think the trend shift here is not just a rise to the right, but also incorporating some of these centrist parties, incorporating elements of the right into their centrist policies. It's almost, I think the trend is actually the death of being a centrist party. That seems to be the takeaway.
Kriti, what's the feeling in the UK these days, with some hindsight here, about Brexit. How's it kind of settling out here?
I mean, it's kind of coming back to haunt them. I think that's fair to say. I think that is the consensus, but no one really likes to admit it, admittedly, that this is something that has caused extreme damage to the UK economy and arguably the European economy as well. So when you look at it in the political standpoint, Keir Starmer's front and center on this. He's trying to create some sort of camaraderie with the Europeans, the continental Europeans, I should specify, with things like defense, for example. But then the real things that continental Europeans want in Paris, in Frankfurt, is what they call this under 30s mobility scheme. It basically means if you work in financial services, you're under 30, you're a junior banker at Deutsche Bank or BNP or wherever, and you want a job in London, you want that juicy London salary relative to continental Europe, you can't get it post-Brexit. And that's the kind of the meatiest kind of piece that they want. Keir Starmer isn't willing to budge on that line.
Are there tariffs between Germany and England? I mean, Mr. Trump is talking about tariffs like, you've got the she's got the G-Wagon.
Oh, she does?
I think Critty's
Wow.
driving the G-Wagon in Mercedes. I mean, Critty, is there the same tariff debate coming across the English Channel and the North Sea?
There is an interesting tariff debate, but before I go into that, first off, I don't drive a G-Wagon, but I did during Berlin drive a Trabi, which I think you'll appreciate. For the very first time, drove a Trabi in this thing called Trabi World here in Berlin. Basically, this very old car that they kind of created in the 60s and 70s in Germany. It's a lunchbox on a lawnmower is how it's best described, I think. But it is an adventure.
Yeah, in Critty, in my youth, we called that a Yugo. Continue, Tell us about the tariffs across the channel.
The tariffs across the channel, there is actually a unified approach to this, and a lot of this comes from the defense space because the UK has defense carved out from the United States. So when there is that tariff implication in Europe, the UK kind of gets some special rules and special acceptances on that. They call it the special relationship between the US and the UK. Germany is not so lucky, and Germany's kind of cure to their economic kind of slowdown that they've seen is investing in the defense sector. Companies like Rheinmetall, for example, and that's really where you see the difference between the UK and Germany, because there's a quote from Sharon Bell over at Goldman Sachs that 70 to 80% of the defense spend in Europe leaks to the United States. That's an enormous number, and that's what both the UK and the German defense sectors are trying to prevent.
Keir Starmer, how is he doing this early in his office term?
He's hanging in there. I would say his Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, is having a really tough time of it. But right now, look, they're still early, relatively early, less than a year in power at the moment. And a lot of what they're talking about, the fiscal deficits that they're dealing with, the tax crunch that they're dealing with, they're blaming it on the previous administration. That being said, their approval numbers are actually dropping. So there is an expectation that in the next few years, if they aren't able to get a major turnaround, we're going to see another snap election in the UK.
This is great, folks. This is like talk about my youth, like the spy who came in from the cold. A Trabi was made in East Germany from 1957 to 1991. Critty Goop is seriously, I'm making jokes about a Yugo, but what was it like driving the car named after the Soviet Sputnik?
It was kind of terrifying, I'll admit. I wasn't the one driving, but I was in the passenger seat with our very own Tom McKenzie, who's an anchor here at Bloomberg. There was a stick shift. There was a very shaky and sketchy brake pedal, and there were a lot of tourists taking pictures.
Okay.
So there you go.
When Critty Goop design, you never know what you're going to talk about.
I'm learning about this. It's not even made out of steel or aluminum. It's made out of some kind of plastic called Duroplast or something.
Yeah. Critty Gupta, thank you so much. Really, really informative from our news bureau in Berlin after this German election. And, just to get back to the headlines, for those of you that missed it, this was, I think, Sunday they did this. It's been out a good 12, 15, 18 hours. But the center conservatives won.
Yep.
Really vanquishing the center left of Mr. Scholz.
Yep.
The Greens did okay, and the far left came on. But the headline here is you can't have a coalition of the center right and the far right. Does that sound like France? I think so. Sounds a lot like Macron.
It does. Yeah. But what's interesting is the far right, these Alternatives for Germany, the AfD party, doubled its support, and they became the second strongest party with almost 21% of the vote.
In many of the segments of East Germany, they took 30%. The highest was 38% in one of the districts, one of the states as well. But, interesting. And again, it all folds back into the greater European community, as we talked to Critty there about Mr. Farage and the mystery of what will happen with United Kingdom politics in the coming weeks. No mystery here on a Monday. A lift to the market. Futures up 31. Dow futures rebound. The level on futures on the Dow, 43,800. That's a wow statistic. Oil, $70.45 per barrel. The real yield comes in at a 202. From New York City, Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene on YouTube, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got Dow futures leading the gains before the bell. They're up about 0.7%, 324 points. S&P futures up 0.5%. NASDAQ futures up 0.4%. We have the 2-year yield 4.22%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.44%, and that's up 1 basis point. To commodities, we have COMEX gold $2,962 an ounce. Brent crude $74 a barrel. We have WTI crude $70 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little change. And we have Bitcoin up just 0.1% at just over 95,000. Some deal-making news. We'll start with shares of Just Eat up more than 54% in Amsterdam. This is after technology investor Prosus agreed to buy it for $4.3 billion. You have Prosus down about 6% in Amsterdam. And National Grid, it's going to sell its U.S. onshore renewables business to Brookfield Asset Management for $1.7 billion. Shares of National Grid are up about 1% in London. And in other news, Italian lender UniCredit set to increase average bonus for most leading executives by about 11%. That's after posting record profits last year, according to sources. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. I was bragging about Henrietta Trays this weekend.
Sure.
How fortunate we were to have her on to give us perspective here. Whatever your politics, the tumult and turmoil, I'm stopped in every single conversation in the great city of New York is about the moment we're in.
Yep.
To have Henrietta Trays with us is a joy. She's with Veda Partners to translate. Henrietta, let me translate this. Jack Reed of Rhode Island wrote an essay in the Washington Post this weekend that was, to be polite, blistering about the military and the commander-in-chief. In the quarters of the legislative branches, plural, what are they saying about the exit of an admiral, an Air Force general, and of course the 3 judge advocates?
Yeah, those were incredible moves by the president in a sweeping and obviously pretty problematic for deeply experienced hands. I mean, Jack Reed has so much respect across all sides of Capitol Hill and is really a commanding authority on all things associated with military preparedness and structure and leadership and seniority. I struggle to think of a member outside of John McCain after him who has as much seniority and clout as Jack Reed does in the Senate on this issue. So definitely a tremendous amount of blowback, and I think rightly so. And the replacements are going to be difficult from here on any confirmation hearing. I would say that as of tomorrow, it throws into doubt whether the other senator from Rhode Island, Sheldon Whitehouse, will vote for Jameson Greer to be USTR because of consternation over things like this and elsewhere.
When do we begin? I mean, you are more wired in this literally than anyone I know. Henrietta, when do people of all political persuasions see the legislative branch begin to act? Where is it on the Henrietta Trey's timeline?
Eagerly anticipating. I'm so glad that you asked. I mean, so right now, and for the last month and a half, we have been in the Trump territory, Trump zone. The Senate has operated, and they moved forward their budget last week. This is the House's week to shine. But Speaker Johnson must get his budget through this week, because starting next week, they have to negotiate with Democrats. And I think the second it becomes clear that passing any bill to fund the government is going to require a 2.7% hike to non-defense discretionary, a 3% hike to defense spending, and we'll have to get 7 votes in the United States Senate from the Democratic Party, means you're going to lose all those members that Speaker Johnson has tried so mightily to wrangle for the last couple of weeks. When you have to negotiate with Democrats and it's a mandatory requirement to get 60 votes for a spending bill in the Senate, that's when the wheels start to come off. So the urgency on this week is really the last hurrah, and Speaker Johnson has to get this done, because next week Democrats finally get to insert themselves into the process.
Are you surprised, with a little bit of hindsight here, Henrietta, that President Trump was able to get all of his cabinet, I believe all of his cabinet nominees through congressional review?
And what is it, something like the fastest speed for 18 members, I think, maybe in history? It's something very quick on this front. I was speaking with some of your colleagues a couple weeks ago here. I think delivering on nominations, especially these confrontational sort of non-traditional nominees like Hegseth or Kash Patel, et cetera, is the easiest lift that Republican members in blue states, in swing states, in newly Republican districts, those are some of the easiest lifts that they have for this president going into the next 4 years. From here on out, it becomes, how do you find $4.5 trillion to offset the cost of extending existing tax rates and supporting tariffs that usually, historically, Republicans have not supported, and a whole other basket of problems from DOGE and cuts to Medicaid. It gets exponentially more difficult here, and I think that's why the committees or the nominees got confirmed.
Henrietta, my complete knowledge of deputy directors of the FBI is Elvin Kirsch, who was a deputy director on the X-Files. That's my total knowledge here of what's going on.
I knew that name.
David Bowditch, Mark Giuliano, Sean Joyce, John Pistoli. We don't know these people, but they're not like the new deputy director, are they?
They're not like the new deputy director, but you know what I think is really interesting is how all the agencies are coming out of the woodwork acting exactly the same as they have historically. So, for example, when Elon Musk sends a tweet or an email out this weekend saying, give me 5 things that you did this week to all the employees of these various agencies, he's overstepping his bounds, and the directors of these agencies are letting him know. So Kash Patel saying, hey, anybody that works for me, do not respond to Elon Musk. You report to me. I think that's really telling and very consistent with the priorities of any agency head in the past. And I think that that's at least reassuring to know that personal agenda is still alive and well and true.
Henrietta, don't be a stranger. Henrietta Trace, thank you so much with Veda Partners. Just outstanding. And the schedule really picks up. I mean, it really, there's no other way to put it.
Got to fund the government.
It really picks up. Futures up 29. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. And as we've been talking about, tens of thousands of federal workers left in the lurch this weekend after an email appeared in their inbox ordering them to write a list of accomplishments made over the last week. The email comes after President Trump praised Elon Musk and suggested that he be more aggressive with spending cuts. However, several agencies, including the FBI, are telling workers to hold off on replying. Meanwhile, waves of terminations and resignations have hit agencies across the federal government since President Trump's second term. Sarah Levine, a federal prosecutor who was part of the investigations into the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol, is one of the people who has been fired by the administration.
Because I did my job. I mean, it's really that simple. I went in, I followed the facts, I followed the law, and I got fired because I did exactly what I was supposed to do.
Levine spoke to CBS's 60 Minutes. Germany's conservative leader, Friedrich Merz, emerged as the winner in Sunday's election. Merz's alliance won under 29% of the votes, but the only clear path to power is to partner with Chancellor Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats. Merz vowed to quickly and move to avoid protracted coalition talks. The Vatican says Pope Francis remains in critical condition and blood tests show early kidney failure. Doctors also say the Pope has chronic underlying lung conditions, but the Holy See press office says he is alert and well-oriented. He even participated in a mass at a hospital in a small chapel. Meanwhile, religious leaders, including the Archbishop of New York, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, offered their thoughts and prayers during the gatherings of the faithful yesterday.
Our Holy Father, Pope Francis, is in very, very fragile health and probably close to death.
Pope Francis, who is 88, remains on oxygen support. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
I attended the service yesterday with Cardinal Dolan. It was something. I'll tell you, it was just remarkable. Yeah. That long aisle, and wow. It was just, and in his statement during the homily, Mrs. Keene was shocked at the directness of his language. But it's now in real time. I guess it's a watch. Yeah. There's hope. Critical condition, but, you know, the good medicine, maybe they can move it forward. But we'll see. We'll have coverage of that, of course, out of our Rome News Bureau. One of the great things Matt Winkler did was build that out over the years. Futures up 25, Dow futures up 289. It's a lift to the market. But, you know, I thought Robert Teeter, I was hanging on every word.
Sure, absolutely. And another big moment this week, Tom, will be NVIDIA earnings.
Thank you.
It's obviously it's such a delay, Tom, from the rest of the earnings cycle for the S&P 500.
Do we have a why?
Because they can. They kind of do what they want to do. But we'll see. But it's again, it goes to that whole AI spending cycle and kind of where are we here. So great read.
We will see. What Paul and I are looking at today is oil week, $70. West Texas with a 69 print for a cup of Sanka earlier this morning, really right down on the edge. The 10-year real yield out at a 2.01. Michael Purvis of Tallbacken, a brilliant note this morning.
Now a look at the front pages. What's making news around the world? Your daily roundup of today's headlines on Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, and Lisa Mateo.
Good morning, everyone. Lisa Mateo here. Michael Barr here as well. There's just too much going on a Monday morning. Thank you for being with us, particularly in your living room, in your office, on YouTube. The daily front page is the Lisa Mateo Hour. It's brought to you by IBKR. Will the year-over-year change in U.S. PPI, will it exceed 3%? In February 2025, at IBKR Forecast Trader, the yes was recently at 39%, 39%. What's your take? Trade your prediction at ibkr.com/forecast. She was in at 1 a.m. working on this. What do you got, Lisa?
This is starting with the Wall Street Journal. So they're saying there's a shift in the housing market. Buyers are finally starting to get the upper hand again. Redfin is saying the average home now changing hands for less than 2% less than the price on the listing.
2%.
Yes. So the reason why, I know, growing list of supply of homes on the market. The houses on the market are there a bit longer. The most buyer-friendly area now is actually the Florida market, Miami and Fort Lauderdale. Really? Yes. Because the things are starting to change there, but it's not everywhere. They also point that out. They point out, like, for example, Wyckoff, New Jersey. There was this house there that sold $300,000 over the asking price for all cash. So it kind of depends where you live, but they're starting to see this shift. I'm starting to see it a little bit
Really?
too, on a
Okay, 'cause
personal
you-
note.
'cause
Yeah,
you've been active
because
in
I've been actively
Yes.
looking. I've been
Okay.
outpriced in New Jersey, but you know what? I went to Pennsylvania and I went
No.
under, and I
Oh, you
went
did?
under.
Went under.
So now you have the extra, side place for the family to enjoy on the weekends, and you still get your place, but you don't have to be so competitive and be outpriced and frustrated.
What do you see on the short? I mean, it's
Just
nuts.
crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah. And people buy something, and if it wasn't built in the last 10 or 15 years,
Yeah.
they knock it down and build
And they
something
build,
new.
yes,
Yeah.
Yep.
yes.
Next.
Amazing.
Okay, so something new at spring training. They were testing out the robot empires. They had it in the minors like the past few years, but
This.
yeah. But I see the thing is that it's not actually a robot. So the umpire's there. The only people that can challenge it is the pitcher, the catcher, or the batter. Those are the only three people that can challenge it. And when they do, you only get 2 misses. Kind of like football, I guess, is the same thing. So that's a difference. But what they're finding is that they're not sure if it's going to work or not. I mean, it could be in 2026, but do people want this? Do the fans want it? Do the players want it?
It's not as clean as the incredible rule changes of 2 years ago.
Yeah, those were
It's
great.
all there is
Speeding
to
up
it.
the game. Yep.
Terry Francona, smartest guy on the planet. Do you know he's down to the Reds? He's out there, with the Cincinnati Reds. I gotta watch him this year.
We'll check that out.
Terry Francona says we're not going to do it because it's not going to be in the majors this year. Why? Distract. So I think it's like a year ahead.
Is it? Yeah, they're saying maybe 2026.
No, I've not.
But the thing is if you're a batter, and you see it and you know that it's not a strike, but you're mad and you don't want to strike out and you challenge it, well, you're risking. You
Is
only get
young
2
Mateo
challenges.
going to have this? Are we going to have,
Oh, and the
complain about
softball?
balls and
Oh, I don't know.
strikes?
I don't know. I don't know.
Next.
I don't know how the parents will take that one. Okay, the Mark Gurman. We had him
Brilliant.
in the
Brilliant.
studio last week. Okay, so his Power On newsletter actually asked a question. Do you go for the cheaper iPhone or do you go for the regular, the normal one? And he actually breaks it down. We're talking about the iPhone 16e. So it's $599, $170 more than the iPhone SE that it's replacing. So should you buy it? The price difference, he said it amounts to an extra $8 a month if you have that 2-year installment plan.
Yep.
And he says that you're not missing much by buying the 16 over the regular. He feels confident recommending the cheaper option as a good enough phone. So his basic advice, here it is, if your current iPhone is out of date, right? You're paying for new devices up front, you get the 16e. But if you're looking to upgrade to the more recent phone with the extra bells and whistles, paying on an installment plan, you spring for the standard iPhone 16. So he kind of breaks it down.
I mean, the issues he says, the various features, I didn't even know they were there. I mean, I don't even know what these features
it's a lot
are.
of a few camera features, video features, those kind of things.
It's basically a
are
camera you
not
can
there.
make a phone call with.
Okay, well, thank you, Mark Gurman, for being with us and profound with his release this morning of job formation in America. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much. The newspapers, thank you, Interactive Brokers, as well. 3 a.m., you're walking around the house. You're checking the dogs, checking the windows, checking the TV room where Afterthoughts up at 3 a.m.
Not good.
Killing the Guitar Hero. What you start with? You start with lead when you're doing Guitar Hero. Good morning.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
What's the immediate take of a tariff war?
For the longest time, technology has been the driver of this market.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Trump declared a national emergency at the U.S. border with Mexico.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Thank you for being with us on your morning commute across the nation on Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, Sirius XM channel 121. Good morning to the corridor from Boston, 92.9 FM. Finally warning about Mount Todd in a heat wave.
Wow.
Got above 10 degrees out at Millinocket. Good morning, 92.9 FM Boston, down at 99.1 FM in Washington. And, of course, on YouTube, this digital experiment we're doing. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast podcasts, all of the different podcasts, and of course what we're doing here for 3 hours each and every morning. The Sweeney hours afterwards, as well. Is Alex Steele? Is there a return?
I believe today is the return, so we wait with bated breath.
Yeah, we wait to see. Well, hopefully we'll have that for you. Holger Schmieding coming up here, and this is going to be a really omnibus, all-in discussion, not just on the German election, but really on the transatlantic relationships, plural, with President Trump and all the upset of Europe as well. Futures up 31 right now on the launchpad. Sweeney looking at American oil, $70.30 a barrel with a 69 print. Very briefly, I'm looking at the 10-year real yield, 2.01%, really down near that 199 level. Bloomberg surveillance this morning, brought to you by IBKR. Will the U.S. CPI, will it exceed 2.4% this March of 2025? Trade your prediction with IBKR forecast trader. The yes was recently at 60%. Buy yes or buy no and earn $1 if you're right. Go to ibkr.com/forecast. And from the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, Lisa Mateo.
And we've got futures pointing to a rebound. This is after Friday's sell-off. We'll start with Dow futures. They're leading the gains up 0.6%, 290 points. We have S&P futures up 0.5%, NASDAQ futures up 0.3%. The 2-year yield 4.22%, up 2 basis points. The yield on the 10-year 4.45%, and that's up 2 basis points as well. After Germany's election, the DAX in Germany right now up 0.8%. We go to currencies. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little change. We have the Japanese yen down 0.3%, 149.79 against a dollar. And we have the euro up 0.1% at 104.70 against a dollar. NVIDIA front and center this week. Investors focus on its growth outlook. That's on Wednesday. It's actually currently leading the gains of the Mag 7 before the open. Its shares are up more than 1% after they fell about 4% on Friday. Then 2 other Mag 7 companies in the spotlight. We'll start with Apple. It says it's hiring 20,000 new workers producing AI servers in the U.S. Its shares are down, though, about 0.5%. And TD Cowen says Microsoft canceling leases for AI data centers in the U.S., potentially reflecting some concerns about overcapacity. Microsoft is up about 0.1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. This is an honor, actually, with his service to the International Monetary Fund and now at Berenberg Bank. Holger Schmieding, truly expert on continental Europe, on the core of Germany, the Netherlands, of France, all the challenges of Eastern Europe over to Ireland, maybe a booming Ireland, the challenges of the United Kingdom and across the Atlantic. Dr. Schmieding, thank you so much for joining on this momentous day for Germany. There was a point, and I clearly remember this in my youth, of an America after the war in absolute awe of Konrad Adenauer, is the gentleman who dragged Germany out of the Marshall Plan and out of the rebuild into something approximating a modern parliamentary system with all the distraction of the Berlin Wall. Would Konrad Adenauer know the Germany of this Monday morning?
Well, he would probably be quite disappointed because we now have right-wing fringe parties and left-wing fringe parties. Fringe in the sense of being at the somewhat extreme ends of the political spectrum. We have these parties with more than 1/3 of the seats in German parliament. That was clearly not the case under Adenauer or anywhere over the last decades. Germany is facing significant problems. The key is that the next government tackles the issues that people are worried about. This includes migration. This includes very much the lack of growth. If these issues are now not tackled forcefully, then the result of the next election in 4 years' time could be even worse.
The solution for Germany is, and this goes from a shadow Germany of the 40s and 50s to particularly the collapse of the wall and all the reunification of 89, 90, 91. Holger Schmieding, the speed of parliamentary process has always been slow motion by United Kingdom standards and, of course, by the fractious American standard. Can Germany speed up their parliamentary process given the challenges right now?
Well, given the challenges that we have to build a coalition first before Mr. Merz, the leader of the centre-right, will be Chancellor, this is not easy to speed it up. The Chancellor to be, Mr. Merz, aims to have the coalition talks over by Easter, which is about 8 weeks from now. That, by continental European standards, for building a coalition would actually be fairly fast. But at a time when we get almost every day news from Donald Trump out of the US, that is, of course, a problem. We have a bit of a, well, vacuum is too much of a word, but we have a bit of a period right now where Germany and Europe cannot really act fully. And that is, of course, a quite unfortunate thing at the moment.
Holger, it's being reported that the far-right Alternative for Germany, the AfD party, doubled its support to become the second strongest party with 20.8% of the vote. Is the expectation that that momentum in terms of growth for this party will continue going forward?
Well, first of all, the AfD fortunately did not do significantly better than opinion polls had projected beforehand. And it will now depend on the new government by Merz whether it can tackle the issues. The AfD really feeds on discontent, especially discontent about uncontrolled migration, where quite likely the new government will take a harsher approach. But it also needs the return to economic growth to dent the appeal of these parties at the left wing or the right wing part of the political spectrum.
The economic challenges, Holger, talk to us about really kind of what they are and in reality what can be done to address them.
The economic challenges are that the core of the German economy, the Mittelstand, these small and medium-sized companies, which often have their dominant position in global markets in a tiny niche, that these companies are no longer investing as much at home as they should. They are unhappy about bureaucracy. They are unhappy about the political uncertainty that we had in the last 15 months during the demise of the old government. They complain about regulations, excessive business taxes, excessive payroll taxes. So we need to do quite a bit in this country to strengthen our core. It is less about fiscal space. Yes, we need fiscal space for the military, but it's mostly about the more difficult, arduous supply-side pro-growth reforms, which include pruning of welfare benefits so that people see more reason to work rather than be on welfare, which includes a few other things, deregulation. If we get back to that, and there's a bit of a chance that we do get back to that under the new government, then the German economy can do well, as long as Donald Trump with trade war threats and his Ukraine policy does not get in the way.
If you're just joining us around the world, Holger Schmieding of Berenberg Bank with us with some very good answers, a learning process on the German elections, what it means for Europe, what it means, of course, for Germany, and of course, across the Atlantic, what it means for America. Again, with Berenberg Bank. Paul?
Holger, I think I speak for a lot of Americans when I looked at the map of the voting in Germany, and it really just surprised me the strength of the far-right Alternative for Germany in the eastern part of the country, the geographic differences in political support here. Can you give us just a little history there and how the various parties and a coalition might try to deal with that?
Well, the map really looks stark. If you look at it in a sort of first past the post, which party came number one, where then we really have pretty much a clear east-west divide. This has many reasons. Part is that in East Germany, fear of economic transformation is more prevalent in the West. After all, the East had, after the collapse of communism in 1990, a very, very painful transition. Part of that is also that in East Germany, there is more of an inclination in the sense of let's rather do a deal with Putin, with the Russians, than give money to Ukraine. The East Germans have been occupied by the Soviet Union, the Russians, of course, for a long, long time. So that's a bit different. There's also in East Germany, there are a bit of a feeling of being left behind as for demographic reasons. Quite a few people from the more rural regions of East Germany have left for the cities partly in the West. Right. And so this left behind feeling is more prevalent over there. Again, the government needs to tackle deep-seated fears about migration, uncontrolled migration, and get the economy going in order to address that.
Part of the work of Bloomberg surveillance over the years, folks, and I think of American experts like Richard Clarida, expert on Germany at Columbia University, or Adam Posen at the Peterson Institute, are delicate questions. We do that now with Holger Schmieding. Holger, the great fear, not so much in America where I think it's distant, but what I see in the European press this morning is any sort of analog, not back to World War II, but back to 1918 to 1923, in the invention of something called the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Is it overdone as a media ploy? Give us a measurement, Dr. Schmieding, of the analog back to another time of the far right in Germany.
I think this is far overdone. The far right is not like that. We had a bit of a party, or we have a bit of a party called BSW, which tried to combine a kind of national tinge, harsh on migration, with a social tinge, a lot more welfare. And this BSW did not do that well. They only got just below 5% of the votes. It is much more a feeling of left behind. And what I said about the remembering the pains of transition that is behind the strength of the AfD in the East. And the AfD is a nasty party, and they do have some neo-Nazis, but it's an exaggeration to say we are back to, say, where we were in the early 1930s. I think an analogy for the political situation in Europe is much more like the one before World War I, you could say, where we had a lot of nations competing with each other rather than a European Union. And what we now see is a bit of a rise of return to nation rather than focusing on European issues.
Dr. Schmieding, well, thank you for that. That was a very elegant answer to a very delicate question. Dr. Schmieding, if we have an isolationist America is posited by the President of the United States, how does that affect all of continental Europe and particularly your Germany?
It, of course, affects us a lot. First of all, we are relatively open to global trade. We depend on global trade. And isolationist America, a protectionist America, is bad for American consumers with higher prices and bad for our companies, which can deliver and do deliver great goods. Even more importantly, an isolationist America that does no longer have a protective umbrella over its European allies means, of course, that we, have to do much more on our own to defend against Putin, and we really should do that. But it also, by putting into doubt the basic premise of NATO, we defend each other against any potential aggressor. That is an encouragement to potential aggressors. That is an encouragement to the nationalists. And that, of course, is something we would not like to see. All in all, to some extent, the Trump policy seems to boil down to, I don't like the European Union. I would rather have, without the European Union, the ability to deal with all these middle or small states in Europe on an individual basis, because then the American advantage would be big in each case. So getting rid of this kind of joint market, 450 million consumers in Europe, seems to be one of the things that's underpinning the Trump approach to Europe, which, of course, is a challenge to us as the European Union. Our common market is the basis of our prosperity and, to some extent, of our peace.
Holger, on immigration here in the U.S., it's relatively straightforward dealing with immigration. We know who's coming into this country. We know where they're coming, and it's just the political will to limit that if we choose to do so. How is it in Germany?
Well, we could close our borders much more than we have done. Of course, that would have repercussions on our immediate European neighbors, who might then be stuck with more of those migrants who actually want to get into the richer Germany. So there are European repercussions upon taking a harsher approach at the German borders. The ultimate solution is, of course, to be tougher on the German borders, to send the message to people far away, don't even try to come to us, because even if you make it to our neighboring countries, you may not make it to Germany. And second, to better protect the common external borders of the European Union, so that the uninvited migrants do not even get into any of the EU member states. It is a process that is on its way. European migration policy is being toughened and the numbers are coming down. But of course, this is Europe, a process that takes time. And the populists feed off on what they think were past mistakes rather than on what is the current stance of policy.
Holger, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it this morning. Holger Schmieding, delicate questions there in Germany. I hope that was informative. I learned a lot there as well. Right now, we have some breaking news. Let's get to Michael Barr right now. First of all, with the news. Michael?
Thank you very much, Tom. German conservative leader Friedrich Merz says he'll begin talks no later than next week on forming a government with the Social Democrats after the former ruling party suffered its worst defeat in Sunday's election since World War II. Bloomberg's Preeti Gupta reports the new chancellor faces a significant challenge in reviving the German economy.
They have this thing called the debt brake that's really baked into the way they govern. It means they can't extend and borrow past a certain limit to make sure that their fiscal finances are always in place. And that has been a really good thing for Germany and the government, because it means they never run into a deficit, say, the way that the United States is. You never have to question the kind of safety of the German debt. And that has helped the German markets for a very long time. Where it hasn't helped is developing the economy and developing the German kind of ecosystem beyond just becoming an industrial base.
Bloomberg's Preeti Gupta reporting from Berlin. Several U.S. government agencies have advised their employees to ignore for now a demand from Elon Musk's Government Efficiency Office to justify their jobs or face dismissal. The Pentagon and Department of Justice have told workers to pause on replying to the Trump administration's email, citing potential legal pitfalls. Health officials say the worst outbreak of measles seen in several years in Texas has been getting worse in recent days. Dozens more cases reported since Tuesday. Officials say nearly all of those infected are children, and in almost every case, the patient was unvaccinated. Dr. John Brownstein of Boston Children's Hospital is worried about kids in daycare.
When you layer a very infectious virus in close quarters with many kids that are unvaccinated, that is a recipe for a disaster.
Dr. John Brownstein. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Paul Sweeney's been way out front of this story. Hannah Levitt at Bloomberg News.
Yep.
Moments ago, and the issue here, folks, the statistic. J.P. Morgan earmarks $50 billion more for direct lending, which, Paul, I think is French for private credit. Do I have that right?
I think you're right. Yeah. I think you're right. It's been one of the just extraordinary growth stories in, I think, global Wall Street over the last 10 to 15 years. We all grew up with private equity and some of the outsized returns that those investors can make. And now that's expanded to now another alternative asset class, Tom, which is private credit. And it kind of stems, what I understand, Tom, from the great financial crisis, the incremental regulations placed upon it. They were boxed out and by certain regulations, and a lot of that demand for credit was still there. And if you couldn't get it from your bank, you'd go to somewhere else, and that would be a private credit provider.
And so I think if I do the math right, Citi and Apollo, they did a $25 billion, so 25 plus 50. I think just the two banks get you to $75 billion.
Yep. Yeah, it's just extraordinary. So I mean, you know, when I was working at the Chase Manhattan Bank, that's what we did. We did leverage lending.
Yeah, you worked there when they were using quills.
Exactly. We did have the
okay. Can I ask the obvious question?
Yep.
Is there too much money chasing too few deals?
I don't think so. I think it's the same kind of capital markets we've always seen. It's just a question of if I want to go fund a deal, whether I'm a private equity player or I just want to build a new plant, I used to go to my banker. I think now I have an alternative. I can go to this private credit folks and see if I can get a
Hannah
deal.
Levitt with the headline, J.P. Morgan, they earmarked $50 billion more for its direct lending push. We'll get Hannah or Sri in here to talk about this as we unfold into Q1, as they say, of 2025. We unfold to an oil price, American oil, $70.24. I'm looking at the 10-year real yield. There it is, 1.99%. We've broken 2% on the 10-year real yield. Michael Purvis, we'll get him in here, folks, from Tallbacken with a brilliant note this morning about the real 2-10 spread. If that's Greek to you, it's Greek to me as well. For global Wall Street, it's like a big. I mean, I saw Michael Barr, he's tanned and rested, and I said, Michael, what do you think? He says, the real 2-10 is just out of control, Tom. So, you know, there we are. Futures up 32, Dow futures up 282.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this Bloomberg Business Flash brought to you by Oracle. Attention growing businesses. Oracle offering to cut your current cloud bill in half if you move to Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. For new U.S. customers with minimum financial commitment, offer ends March 31st. See if your company qualifies at oracle.com/Bloomberg. All right, we've got Dow futures leading the gains before the bell, up about 0.6%, 276 points. S&P futures up 0.5%, and NASDAQ futures, there you go, up 0.4%. The 2-year yield, 4.21%. That's little change, and the yield on the 10-year, 4.43%, and that is little changed as well. But Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. We head to Bitcoin right now, up above 95,000. Some deal-making news this morning. Salesforce, which actually relies on Amazon Cloud Services, it signed a multi-billion-dollar cloud deal with Alphabet's Google. It's committing to spend at least $2.5 billion over 7 years on cloud computing services. You have Salesforce up about 1%, Google up nearly 2%. And Apollo set to buy Bridge Investment Group for $1.5 billion in stock. That's according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, that deal will nearly double Apollo's real estate assets under management to more than $110 billion. And in other news, Financial Times saying fast fashion retailer Shein's profit fell almost 40% last year, and that's putting some pressure on a potential UK IPO. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Lisa Mateo. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Lisa, thanks so much. The VIX 17.59. Haven't mentioned gold. James Steele coming up, up $11, 29.64.
Yep.
On gold.
Goldman Sachs has got that 3100 call out there, Tom.
Yeah, that was floating around this weekend as well. Joining us right now, well-timed, Veronica Clark. She's with Citigroup, their U.S. economist, and with a really sophisticated note. Let me go unsophisticated. I think the financial media quotes inflation and inflation trends with a shocking certitude of belief. This is what's going to happen. What is your uncertainty about guessing inflation towards the end of the year?
Yeah, it's always very high uncertainty, right? There are a lot of factors to consider. I think there's been, a lot of attention on the sticky inflation narrative, what tariffs could do to inflation, obviously would raise some consumer prices, and not a lot of attention on, there are some favorable dynamics in the inflation data right now, something like slowing shelter inflation. That's a really big component of how we calculate CPI and PCE, and we do think that we are seeing slowing inflation now.
So does that bring nominal GDP down? I mean, Paul, where are we, 5%?
Yeah, I mean, it's been solid.
I don't know.
Yeah. On the inflation side of the story, you can get softer nominal growth, but I think also on the real side of the story, you can get softer nominal growth. It does seem like things are slowing.
So, as we think about this economy, Veronica, are we still on a soft landing? The Fed's kind of been pretty successful in negotiating a soft landing?
Yeah. I don't know if we can say we've landed, though, until we're, mission accomplished on inflation. And clearly we're not quite there yet. I think we're on a good path to get there. But until we do, rates are restrictive, and we have been running above potential growth for the last couple years. And there's this story of U.S. exceptionalism, U.S. resilience. But we've never quite seen it that way. This doesn't necessarily look like a very healthy labor market still to us. So I would say that there is definitely the risk that we're not getting that soft landing.
We're going to get core PCE on Friday. Thank you, Ari. On a monthly basis, it's 0.3%. On an annualized basis for the core, 2.6%. I'm calling victory there.
Yeah,
but the Fed
we're pretty
doesn't,
close.
though.
We're pretty close. We did see a lot of that strength in the January CPI, and that's the Fed's not going to love that, of course. But where we saw the strength was a lot different than where we saw it in Q1 last year. It was a lot narrower. It was not so broad based, and PC is actually a more broad based measure of inflation, and it will look a lot softer. I think that will give the Fed some more confidence that yes, inflation is slowing.
Do you ever look at different parts of America and their separate inflation rates? Like, is there an inflation rate for Atlanta?
There is. We do look at some of those details, especially when we're making a forecast for like shelter inflation. It's really important. You get some weird trends in certain parts of the country, but overall, it does seem like inflation is slowing more broadly.
We had Robert Kaplan in. Friday, Thursday, the ex-Dallas Fed president, and we talked about Dallas trimming and all that. Do you people put it anyway? Does Paul mentions? Thank you for mentioning the PCE Friday.
Yeah, how about that?
No idea.
We got to come in now.
Friday, I'm just looking at Red Sox pitching for Friday. But help me here with the trimmed and the fancy inflation statistics. Which one do you believe in right now?
Yeah, if I were going to put weight on any specific measure, it would still be overall core PC inflation. The Fed obviously will look at a number, and we do too, just to get a sense of the underlying trend. The Fed has focused also on market-based core PCE. That's come up in the last couple months. It's still, I think, total core PC that's most important, but all of those can still, add to the assessment of what's happening in inflation.
All right, so that's kind of the inflation discussion. How about the labor market? How are you guys viewing the labor market these days?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe the labor market is a very low churn labor market, and which hiring is very low, quits are very low, but layoffs are also still very low, and it's that layoff trend that is giving the Fed confidence that this is an okay labor market. The unemployment rate has stabilized, but that low hiring I would be really concerned about, because if anything does change that layoff trend, it's maybe the case that those workers getting laid off are not well absorbed into this labor market.
Atlanta GDP was near 3%. It's now, this is the guess, folks, on where's GDP right now. It's 2.4%, 2.3%. So you're going to put declining inflation on top of that. Do we finally get nominal GDP under 5%?
Yeah.
Where we could go normal?
Yeah, I would think so. We've been running at 2 to 3% real growth, 2 to 3% inflation, and I think both of those things are changing this year.
All right, so what's the next, data point or trend of data points that you guys are looking at?
Yeah, obviously we'll get PC inflation on Friday. We have a good sense of where that's going to come in, 0.2, 0.3. It's really next week where we're going to get a lot more new information. That's jobs week, of course. Yep. We'll get the February employment report next Friday. I don't know if we'll see some of the slowing quite yet in February. Some of the February data have looked okay. There will be a lot of attention on the ISM services indicator, I think. We had the weaker services PMI last Friday. But I think it's really into spring, March, April, May data where we could see some more slowing in the labor market again.
Spring. All right, so we're starting to see more and more just tariff discussion, but I think the market's now become more sanguine as it relates to tariffs, that maybe they're more of a negotiating tool on the part of this administration as opposed to a economic policy bedrock. How do you guys factor that in?
Tariffs are being used in for many different objectives right now. There is the negotiation element of it. We saw this with Canada and Mexico. Those were delayed. We'll see if they come back, and that discussion comes back in early March. There will be, I think, an element of tariffs that are used to raise revenue. We do have wide deficits that are intended to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. But if anything, we have seen what's been proposed on the lower end of maybe what people were expecting a couple months ago.
So just quickly here, the Fed they don't do anything until what, September?
We actually think they're cutting again in May.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's an outlier.
Yeah, it is. But I think it's a number of things. I think we will see core PC inflation before that May meeting below 2.5% on an annual basis. We'll get pretty close, I think, to that on Friday. More confidence again that inflation's slowing. You'll get another couple months of data, February and March before then. And again, it comes back to this labor market. I don't think this is a stable labor market.
How do you treat a headline out moments ago? Starbucks to cut 1,100 corporate jobs worldwide. Who else did this? Somebody last week
We've
did
seen
this.
a bunch, some headlines.
Southwest did this. And I mean, is this like a middle management purge? Is this AI?
I don't know. We'll see. Maybe it's somewhat AI related. Maybe some of the slowdown in hiring could be that. We've seen obviously headlines of layoffs for a while. It's really hard to know what those aggregate numbers look like. We're watching things like initial jobless claims. Obviously, the monthly employment report's the most important. We'll see what the government employment changes do.
March 8th. Is there like in New York City a Duke bar and a UNC bar?
Chapel Hill, what happened to you guys this year?
I know, it's sad.
What happened to the whole ACC? We'll talk about this offline.
Can they sneak into the bracket?
They always
March
can.
Madness?
They're North Carolina. They got to do well in the ACC tournament. And really well in the ACC.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah, always watch the Duke game.
Did you ever go to Chapel Hill to see Duke play?
All the time. I went there when it was the old gym before it was the Dean Dome. Carmichael was the old gym. Then they built the Dean Dome, which they should not have done.
Well, this game we are at the Dean Dome. We are at home.
Yes. So it'll be
maybe
good.
that'll give us a bit of
Are you going down to it?
No, I will be watching from a Chapel Hill bar in New York.
I think you should take Andrew Hollenhorst on the UNC.
It'd be very fun.
He's from the left coast. What's he know about real basketball?
No, it'll be good. It's always fun. Great rivalry.
Okay, I think you could expense that up, Jane.
Yeah. Get the CityJet. Just go right down into RDU and be all set.
Veronica, thank you so much. On the Gulf Stream on March 8th, the Duke UNC. Veronica Clark is with Citigroup. Jane Fraser just drove off the road on I-80, I think. Starbucks to cut 1,100 corporate jobs worldwide. Futures up 30, Dow futures up 255, NASDAQ up 0.4%. From New York City on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. It's Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We've got futures on the mend. This is after the S&P 500's worst session of the year on Friday. We'll start with S&P futures up 0.5%, 0.5%, 31 points. Dow futures up 0.6%, 259 points. And Nasdaq futures up 0.4%, 105 points. The 2-year yield 4.21%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year 4.44%, and that's up 1 basis point. We have COMEX gold at $2,968 an ounce. We go to oil, Brent crude at $74 a barrel. WTI crude $70 a barrel. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little changed. On the economic calendar this week, 2 big highlights. We have the Federal Reserve's preferred measure of inflation. That's core PCE on Friday. Then on Thursday, right before that, we have revised fourth quarter economic growth. To earnings, we'll start with Berkshire Hathaway. It's reporting its operating earnings that surged 71% in the fourth quarter. We have Class A and B shares. They're up more than 1%. Then Domino's Pizza still falling, down more than 6% now. This is after a reporting fourth quarter revenue that missed estimates. We're also watching shares of Chinese online retailer Alibaba. Its ADR is down 3%, off 2% in Hong Kong. It pledged to invest more than $53 billion in AI infrastructure over the next 3 years. And also shares of Starbucks up about 0.1%. You've been hearing here, cutting 1,100 corporate jobs to increase efficiency. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Are you guys, do you do Domino's Pizza?
No.
It's really, you know, where
Gosh,
we
no.
are, you know, I don't think it's not, you know, doesn't play.
My oldest son, he was in a period where he was doing Domino's.
He was doing Domino's.
Yeah. It's when the app came out years and years ago, and he thought he was really
that's
cool as a
sort of where we are
12-year-old
as well.
clicking something and pizza would show up at his door.
Yeah.
On my credit card.
It's a miracle. On your credit card, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Futures up 31. Gold is $2,967 an ounce. I have the clearest memory. I think I could shave 1 day a week, maybe 2, of gold from $35, exploding, I say, up to $50 per ounce. And then it kept going through the 70s. And I remember not the gold bug, but the fever over gold among parents and neighbors and social gatherings. All they talked about was gold. James Steele is expert on this and joins us right now. You know, I go to log regressions when you walk in the room. You know, I know you do this at HSBC all the time. But gold actually back to post-Nixon is remarkably contained. It's one standard deviation above the log trend going back 50 years. I extrapolated out to 2038, 2040 at $5,000 an ounce. Can you extrapolate gold out on a linear basis like that? Log linear basis?
It doesn't quite work with gold, Tom, in the way that it can do with other commodities or other financial
building
instruments.
free cash flows and the rest.
That's right. That's right. I think one way to look at it, there's a lot of discussion now about that gold is at new highs, and it is. It's at new highs in nominal terms. The all-time high is $850 in January of 1980, which you and I we all remember.
See it right here. That's our two standard deviations.
And that roughly is $3,400 in today's money. So there is, on that basis alone, and I'm not saying it would go there, there is on that basis a historical precedent for the market to go higher. But it did drop afterwards for 10 or 15 years. It dropped very quickly for the next 10 years.
So for those of us that are used, like equity people like myself, valuation, PE ratios and things like that, how do I feel about gold and value and for precious metals? How do I get a sense of value? Is something overvalued versus undervalued?
Well, I think you should look at cost of production, but even that does not really work. There's a big range between the cost of gold at the high end and the low end. All-in sustaining costs in very expensive countries can be well over 2,000, but again, it's in the mid hundred, 1,500, 1,400 less expensive countries. Really, what gold is it's a reaction to the financial markets and to economic and other stresses, and it's really a barometer, and that's the best way to look at it. I don't think, in that sense, you can get a fair value. Similarly, with when I covered oil, it was very difficult, when you have OPEC playing a role in it, and you have government policies, to figure out what is the fair value of oil, and I think it's the same with gold, and right now, the market is nervous and it's been very strong.
What percentage of gold people trade it versus invest in it?
Well, I think most are buy and hold.
Most are buy and hold. Okay.
And that's why we think that the exchange-traded funds, for example, are unlikely to fall much further than they have. They did hit 111.5 million ounces in 2020 during the COVID, and then they dropped more recently down to 80 million ounces, and now they're back up around 83, 84. But every million ounces that comes out of the ETFs, the next million becomes harder to get because you go away from those that trade it frequently down to those that are going to keep it for buy and hold.
James Steele with us with HSBC, a good lengthy discussion here on gold at 3,000. I just brought up Newmont. Gold mining shares, I don't know anything about other than Newmont 10-year track record, 8% per year. That doesn't seem like the hard metal. Why do the mining stocks underperform the actual bullion?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not really allowed to comment on the mining stocks because I'm strictly a commodities.
No, I understand that. But
I think one of the differences is that, there's a lot of gold above ground. With a gold company, you're thinking about reserves and looking for new reserves. They're becoming, I can tell you on a broad macro front,
please,
it's becoming much more difficult to find more gold. We've only been looking for oil for 150 odd years. We've been looking for gold for 5,000 years.
Where is the marginal new gold? I mean, no one's listening. Lisa, take a note here. Where's the marginal new gold besides Bulgari over on Fifth Avenue?
Well, you have it increasingly in more difficult and places to access: Papua New Guinea, Indonesia, West Africa, up in the Andes. Let me give you an example. In South Africa, we got about an ounce of gold for every ton of rock in 1970, and it's more like 2.5 tons now.
Wow.
So it's the ore grade that is falling. Now, mines are very efficient, and they've been doing a great job, but it's just getting more difficult.
President Trump, and I think to a certain degree Elon Musk, questioning what's in Fort Knox. Do you have any knowledge of what's in Fort Knox? And is there any way for, individual? Is this publicly disclosed information?
I don't myself have any knowledge, nor do we have any knowledge of, I believe, what's at Fort Knox. It's around 8,000 tons.
But who says that? Is that a government
It's the U.S.
figure?
Treasury, yes.
Okay,
It's the United States government. These are U.S. gold reserves. Now, we had more until Bretton Woods, until we got handed dollars and asked for the gold back under the Bretton Woods system. And that began with France under de Gaulle. And we got a gold flow leaving the country because we were running a current account deficit. Nixon then closed the gold window, and that ended the hemorrhaging of gold coming out of the U.S. And since then, the gold reserves have remained unchanged at around 8,000 tons. I haven't been in Fort Knox. I don't think I would ever be allowed to.
In this day of, we're all sophisticates now quickly here because we're going to come back with James Steele. Is there an arbitrage right now in physical gold worldwide, I should say?
Well, what's been going on is that the threat of tariffs on bullion coming. London is the world's physical market. New York is on the COMEX, where I used to work. The CME is the world's futures markets. So there's a natural arbitrage between them, which goes through something called the exchange for physicals. Now, if you were to put a tariff on bullion and silver, gold and silver coming in, then that would blow the EFP, which is what's happened. It's blown the EFP out, and it's attracted gold and silver from around the world into New York.
So does that mean that if Lisa Mateo's coming out of Heathrow into JFK or into Newark, that she's got to borrow gold or something equivalent in her suitcase to, arbitrage it here for profit?
Well, gold is pretty much an international price. That's what makes it so useful. These are just dislocations within the physical market that's been noted, and it hasn't necessarily pushed the gold market up that much. It's just been a shift in bullion.
We're going to come back. I should point out, Lisa Mateo, brought to you today in London by Boodles. Shop Boodles at the Royal Exchange. Lisa Mateo, thank you so much for that wisdom on gold. Futures up 32, the VIX 17.6. And we're going to continue with James Steele. That's a good thing with HSBC. From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene. Can't say enough about our guest James Steele with HSBC as we look at gold and precious metals. Paul's got like 8 questions here, but James, let me just dive into it. Culturally, how does Beijing look at gold? I get that there's a culture of Dubai, there's a culture of Southeast Asia. Is there a government culture in China like an Asian culture of gold?
I wouldn't necessarily say a government culture, Tom, but there's definitely a predilection towards owning gold. Very similar to India, very similar to Southeast Asia. Countries historically, and I'm talking about long-term history here, that have frequent economic disruptions, inflation, where institutions are weak. And I'm not talking about present-day China here, but this is all historically bred a turn towards gold. Now, it's been relatively recent that gold's been allowed to be freely traded in China because much of under Mao, the gold was confiscated. And the Chinese market only started to liberalize in 1997, which is why, particularly around the global financial crisis, we saw enormous reserves going into China because it was a new market for them. It's still relatively new for them.
All right, so we've killed gold here. How about silver? What's the play here in silver these days? What do clients want to know?
Well, one of the reasons they want to know is why it hasn't marched up in tandem with gold.
Does it typically do that?
It tends to. What happens is the difference between gold and silver is that and gold is used for industry, 6 to 8%. It's 56 to 58% in silver. So that makes a difference. They have a much smaller jewelry and a coin and bar market. Now, investors look at a ratio, how many silver ounces will buy an ounce of gold, and right now it's way up at the high end of that. So what we'll often see is someone may be interested in bullion, they may miss a big move, $50, $100 move up in gold, they'll then turn to silver, and we'll see silver move after. It doesn't necessarily mean the silver fundamentals are there, and I think that's why silver hasn't gone up at the pace of gold, because it doesn't quite have the underlying story that gold has.
Tell me about EVs and palladium. Catalytic converters, I flunked that on an exam once. I mean, is palladium like adjusting because of all the EVs, particularly in Europe?
Well, palladium is a loser out of that, as is platinum.
Platinum as well?
Yes, but platinum has other things going for it that palladium does not. Neither palladium nor platinum are used in a full electric vehicle. So you completely exclude the autocatalytic component.
Wow.
Now, 85% or more of palladium use is for autos. Less than 50% of use in platinum is for autos. So platinum can weather a decline in petrol-driven vehicles and a move to EVs better than palladium can. The other thing, too, is that platinum is still benefiting from a substitution with palladium. So our figures for auto demand for platinum are not down that much, whereas we do have a decline in palladium. And that's why we think platinum will gain on palladium. The way people look at gold and silver, they'll also look at platinum and palladium. And we believe platinum will be stronger than palladium.
James Steele, thank you. Huge response out of YouTube to Mr. Steele's appearance today here. Platinum is used, hydrogen technology for transports. Thank you for that. A lot of different interest here.
Yeah, piling in.
I don't think I've ever seen palladium. Have you?
I don't.
Lisa, do you have a palladium ring?
I do not, no.
It's used mostly for watches.
Watches?
For watches.
Yeah, mostly. It doesn't really have a jewelry component.
Okay. Well, the swatch, I'm not sure I have that. James Steele, thank you so much with HSBC. We got Mike Wilson coming up. Please stay around for that. Global Wall Street, that's a treat. My treat at 3 a.m. was Guitar Hero. And I mean, Afterthoughts cranking the Guitar Hero. Did you wake me? No, you didn't wake me, Afterthought. What was she doing? Santana, Abraxas. I said, can I listen with you?
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
The president wants lower interest rates from Chairman Powell.
You can make the argument that this is a really rich market.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Stocks are coming off another record high.
And Michael Barr with news.
President Trump signing a wide range of executive orders.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo, all together. Going to get right to it. Mike Wilson will join us. He's Chief U.S. Equity Strategist at Morgan Stanley. After that, Bob Dahl will join us. To have Mike Wilson, Bob Dahl with us is what you need for a market recalibration. This with futures up 33. The VIX 18-ish. Friday. Angst out there. We're back in 17.55. But the news flow, and of course, with all of the politics and uncertainty that's going on right now, well timed to have back-to-back Mike Wilson and Bob Dahl with us here through the 9 o'clock hour. We say good morning on your commute on Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, in your Palladium and Platinum-free EV.
Yeah.
Every time James Steele comes in, it's like a font of wisdom.
I know. It's just gold, silver, platinum, and palladium. That's all you need in the precious metal space.
Do you think we should do a remote from Fort Knox?
Oh, that'd be great. We'll go count some
Put
gold.
us in a lobby out there?
Sure.
Yeah, Lisa can go.
I'm sure we can get approval for that.
Yeah, we'll see. Futures again up 33. From the Interactive Broker Studios, right to it, the Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa Mateo.
And we got futures trying to battle back after Friday's sell-off. We'll start with Dow futures, up about 0.5%. Same for S&P futures. And NASDAQ futures also up 0.5% and 116 points. The 2-year yield, 4.21%. That's up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.44%. And that is little changed. After Germany's election results, want to check in with the DAX. Germany up 0.8%. We go to currencies. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little change. We have the Japanese yen down 0.3% at 149.76 against the dollar. And we have the euro up about 0.1% at 104.68 against the dollar. All eyes on NVIDIA this week. Investors focus on its growth outlook on Wednesday. Currently leading the gains in the Mag 7. Before the open, shares are up more than 1% after falling about 4% on Friday. 2 other Mag 7 companies in the spotlight. Apple is one. The company says it's going to hire 20,000 new workers, produce AI servers in the U.S. Its shares down about 0.5%. And then Microsoft building more AI computing than it will need for over the long term. That's the question. TD Cowen report says Microsoft has begun canceling leases for a significant amount of data centers capacity in the U.S. Microsoft up about 0.3%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. Joining us now, Mike Wilson. He's Chief U.S. Equity Strategist at Morgan Stanley, and exceptionally well-timed here with a really smart Sunday note a bit ago on alpha over beta. Explain the Greek letters, Mike Wilson, to us. What is alpha, what is beta, and why does alpha win?
Hey, good morning, Tom. Yeah, I think most of your listeners understand this. Beta is sort of your market level risk where you just own the index, and then alpha would be your stock picking. It's that simple. And you know what's happened in the last 3 months is that the index itself has gone sideways, but there's been great opportunity under the surface, and that's really the job of most investors is to pick stocks and try to beat people. So it's a good outcome if it can sustain for active managers. And by the way, people say, "Oh, stock picking market." It doesn't mean it's easy. But I mean, it does feel like that's what we're dealing with.
It kills me. He puts at the end of his note, Paul, enjoy your Sunday. Come on, Mike. It's Sunday. Exactly. Mike, I'm looking at the Bloomberg Launchpad, and I got a 199 on the 10-year real yield. My idiot ambiguity meter is that's a slowing economy. When you look at Seth Carpenter and company's work, do you model in a slowing or level economy where we walk away from double-digit earnings growth?
Yeah, well, I mean, remember the economy is not always the market or earnings. And what we've seen in the last, I would say, really 3 years is an economy that looks fairly robust at the aggregate level. You can talk about that at the consumer level or just in terms of GDP. But then when you look at earnings growth for the last several years, it's been pretty lousy for most companies until recently. Recently, we've seen a pickup. More companies are starting to grow again. And I attribute this to essentially the government being, crowding out, if you will, much of the economy. That is the reason we have inflation. For the main reason we have inflation, too much government spending. Also, it has kept interest rates higher than they would be normally. So real interest rates at 2% is actually quite high, Tom, as you know, for the last 15 years. And we're such a financialized economy that that has had a sort of a braking effect on businesses that don't have easy access to capital. So I think the Fed right now is sort of in a a tighter place than they probably want to be. They would like to cut rates, but they can't because inflation now is picking its head up again. So they're on hold. They're not going to raise rates in our view, but we're trying to find that equilibrium now. Like, how big should the government be? How can we liberate the private economy in a way where we have better velocity, kind of in the real private economy than just government?
Mike, I'm looking also at your chart book where you guys track what companies are actually saying on their conference calls. What's top of mind for corporate America? And I guess not surprisingly, one of those key issues is tariffs. How did tariffs kind of factor into kind of your view of inflation and maybe how the Fed will proceed and how that might impact stocks?
Yeah, well, I think the Fed has told you, pretty straightforward since December that the uncertainty around tariffs is another reason why they're probably going to take a pause on the rate cutting campaign. Now, remember, they have another lever they can use, which I think they will, which is to basically end QT finally, which is, a decent amount of repurchases then across the curve. They can probably start doing that in May or June. And that's another lever that they can sort of pull on. As far as companies go, I mean, companies are always, trying to incorporate these changes into their business models and how they're running their own companies. And tariffs are front and center right now because not only is that a potential headwind, but it's also uncertainty because, one day we have them on, the next day they're being delayed. And look, that's what companies have to manage that process. The good news is, I think in the last round of tariffs back in 2018, a lot of companies did relocate some manufacturing, some final assembly to areas like Mexico. I think that may be one of the reasons why the president is going after Mexico, because that was kind of a backdoor way of avoiding tariffs on China. So it's just going to be, 6 months of uncertainty. And that's why companies are mentioning it, because, they don't want to get caught, in a way where they're guiding too high and then tariffs end up being a headwind for their growth expectations.
On equity markets, we have Mike Wilson with us with Morgan Stanley, Bob Dole to join later. We welcome all of you on your commute across the nation on all of our different radio platforms. And on Bloomberg Podcasts, subscribe to YouTube. Working for us each and every day. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts on YouTube. Paul?
Mike, we're going to hear from NVIDIA Wednesday after the close. That's one of the last big companies reporting earnings in this cycle here. What did you take away from this quarterly's earnings cycle, and more importantly, maybe the guidance you've been paying attention to?
Well, first of all, it shows that the fourth quarter was boom times. Now, some of that, once again, was government. Fiscal deficit was up 40% year over year. But also there was some excitement around, just a clean election, maybe a more pro-growth, administration. And so there was more activity in the fourth quarter. And so what we're seeing now is kind of just that rolling off a bit, that maybe we got a little ahead of ourselves. Higher rates and stronger dollar was weighing on some of the guidance for 25. Companies tend to do that seasonally anyways. They want to lower the bar a bit at the beginning of the year. But then the other things that have been we've been focused on, really in no particular order: tariffs, as you already mentioned. Number two, we have immigration enforcement, which has been a huge fiscal boost and also a labor supply boost. And then we have DOGE, right? The Department of Government Efficiency. Right. They're off to an aggressive start. I'm optimistic that. I'm probably more optimistic than most that they can make some headway there. But remember, the more successful they are in the short term, the more growth negative that is in the near term before you get to the good stuff. And then, of course, the positive effects of policy like deregulation, maybe extending the tax cuts, those come later in the year. Those require congressional approval. And so that's just not, that's going to take 6 to 12 months. And so the bad stuff first, the good stuff comes later.
Mike Wilson, to get back to your idea that alpha is the way this works, and let's just generalize that as individual stock selection, what is the Mike Wilson process there? Is it securities research, Graham, Dodd, and Cottle, bottom up? Is it a sell-side concept of looking at what's going to win? Or is it more factor-based where you're looking at different items and trying to figure out, like, say, will momentum or something else win?
That's a great question, Tom, and it has changed over time. I think The main thing that's changed in the institutional world, anyways, is the time horizon. So, 20 years ago, I would say institutional investors were kind of in this 6 to 12 month time horizon. It's now, 1 to 3 months, and in some cases, 1 to 3 days. So that's what's changed, and that means you just got to be really laser focused on kind of news at the margin, whether it's fundamental news around a specific company, whether it's a macro changing event that can affect certain companies differently. So all those things we look at, I would say that quantitative analysis and factor analysis has probably picked up the most. Most institutional investors now, including ourselves as advising them, use that tool, and it's quite helpful. As you mentioned, price momentum is probably the most important factor variable because everybody likes to perform. And I would say, that can also get you in trouble because what ends up happening is you end up, as I like to say, using price as your analyst. As opposed to doing the analysis and then letting price follow. And I think that's just the world we live in now. Everybody's short-termism. I don't think that's going to change anytime soon.
Bottle that. For all of you worldwide, whatever your sophistication, what Mike Wilson just said there, and Paul Sweeney and I lived this, of where 3 years became 18 months and 12 months became 3 months, and what are we doing to window dress at the end of the quarter? The short-termism now, and how can you prosper by pushing against that, as Mike Wilson alluded to there. That was extraordinary.
Yeah, a lot of it, I think, coincident with the growth of hedge funds as well. Mike, what screens well for you guys these days?
Well, getting back to the stock picking, I mean, now this particular factor always screens well, but it's extremely important now is earnings revision breadth. So companies that are showing the ability to kind of continue to raise numbers is you're getting paid for that more now than you normally do. You always get paid for that, but now you're getting paid for it more, and you're getting punished for it on the other side. The other factor that's really working is quality. Quality has been working really well the last 2 or 3 years because of that sort of crowding out feature. But in the fall, we saw a movement towards low quality, and then now we're giving that back. So large cap, quality, earnings revision breadth, those are the 3 most important factors. And of course, price momentum still, is important as well.
How about on the industry side? What stands out to you guys these days?
So it's been consistent really since November. Financials, mainly the banks, as opposed to other financials and capital markets companies. Software, particularly relative to, say, semiconductors and hardware, they're less affected by tariffs. And there's some reinvestment now as we go from the enabler to the adoption layer for AI. That should benefit media and entertainment, not just media and entertainment. Wow. And the traditional media entertainment names are doing well. Remember, those are mostly domestic businesses. Yeah, mostly domestic, yeah. And then, of course, services, consumer services, which is the one part of the private economy which is still doing quite well. Services is doing much better than goods.
Mike, I'm guessing from your clients you get a valuation question or two every day. Boy, this market seems expensive. How do you respond generally?
We don't get many questions on valuation anymore. I think people have given up on that metric. That metric has faded in its importance in the short term. Okay, and as I like to say, in the short term, valuation doesn't matter at all. In the long term, it's the only thing that matters. So we've seen, as rates went back through 4.5% on the upside, we identified that as an area where valuation would matter. It has mattered, but not to the degree that it has historically. So I'm not sure what's going to get us, for that to become in vogue again. But it's not an important factor at the moment.
Talk to us about breadth of the market, Mike. A lot of folks, and Torsten Slok today was just out with a note from Apollo just talking about the concentration within this equity market, particularly in big cap U.S. technology names, and how that's really relative to the rest of the world just getting more and more pronounced. How do you think about breadth or lack of breadth in this market?
Well, it gets back to quality. So, and I would say as bad as the concentration is in the U.S., we have like 5 stocks or 30%. It's even worse in places like Germany, where you have 3 stocks or 35%, or in parts of Asia. And what's going on is the same thing that's going on here, which is that people are crowding into kind of these large cap quality stocks. It just so happens that the U.S. has more of them. So, but in other places of the world, there's fewer of them, why the crowding is even more so. So it's just more of the same. Basically, people, the markets are smart. They've crowded into what's working. What's working is large cap quality, particularly quality growth, and that because they have scale and they can operate in this world where perhaps rates are high. The government is a big part of the economy. You have a lot of uncertainty, multipolar world. Geopolitics is, kind of putting pressure on certain regions. And, I think that continues for the foreseeable future. The thing that could change that, which I'm getting a little excited about, is if we can shrink the government. So imagine this. You have a recession in government. I'm not sure that would be that bad for the private economy. I'm not sure we're going to get that. But if we did, that would potentially change that dynamic.
Right. Mike Wilson, very quickly here, talk about enthusiasm. I mean, Michigan State taking out Michigan in basketball, that was like Big Ten classic, wasn't it?
Well, it was a classic for if you're not a Michigan fan. But
they can still come back.
The Big Ten is always competitive, Tom, as I like to say, in both basketball and football and other sports as well. So, and Big Blue has had a good run recently. So we're going to leave.
Yeah. I mean, they're in second place. And they have the two teams up top. A Big Ten is important. Why is USC in the Big Ten? Does Mike Wilson understand? Please help me.
So the kids
here.
from Los Angeles, they come all the way to Piscataway, New Jersey to play basketball.
Oregon is in the Big Ten. Mike Wilson, this is un-American. I hope Michigan takes every victory from the way on, pushes those Westerners out of it. Mr. Wilson is with Morgan Stanley. Thank you so much, Mike Wilson. Futures up 28. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Paul, Lisa. Elon Musk calling for more than 2 million federal employees to defend their work. He is drawing pushback from within the Trump administration. Several U.S. government agencies, including at the Pentagon, have advised their employees to ignore demand from Musk's Government Efficiency Office to justify their jobs or face dismissal. We get more from Bloomberg government reporter Kate Ackley.
This is coming amid a big wave of seeming to be firings and reductions in force at USAID, which works very closely with the State Department abroad and at home. So a lot of chaos across the federal agencies today that will reverberate on Capitol Hill this week.
Bloomberg government's Kate Ackley in Washington. Catholic communities around the world gathered to pray for Pope Francis as he remains in critical condition. The Pope has been hospitalized for a lung infection and is now showing early signs of poor kidney function. In New York, hundreds gathering in prayer, led by Cardinal Timothy Dolan.
We of the Catholic family and so many of our friends and neighbors find ourselves this morning at the bedside of a dying father.
Pope Francis has been in the hospital now for more than 10 days. His doctors say his prognosis remains uncertain. Ukraine is in the final stages of talks with the U.S. over a deal to give Washington a cut of the country's natural mineral resources. According to Ukraine's deputy prime minister, both sides have been locked in intense negotiations over the agreement that President Trump's administration sees as integral to its plan to broker a ceasefire in Russia's 3-year war on Ukraine. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it. With the Bloomberg News Now, I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Out on YouTube today, lit up like a candle for Yankees fan Paul Sweeney.
Yep.
And the basic idea is bearded Sweeney. I mean, Graybar went over to the Tigers. It is fully bearded.
Yeah. So it's an end of an era for the Yanks. You can have some modest kind of facial hair, well groomed.
I'm a Red Sox fan. What do I know?
Gleyber Torres. Yeah. So I guess well groomed beard is okay, I guess.
Okay.
So there you go.
I saw the thing out on YouTube, and I'm saying it was a bearded Sweeney. They're a band. They play at the Parker House in New Jersey, don't they?
Oh, yeah.
Down in God's basement?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, one of the great Jersey Shore bars.
Opens in May?
Yep, May 9th.
When you were there 5 nights a week as a kid.
Back in the day.
I mean, you show up in the middle of May and get it going. And
yeah.
Memorial Day weekend.
That's the big kickoff. That's a big kickoff. But what's great about the Jersey Shore, every Jersey Shore town has its own great shore bar or 2 or 3. And that's what makes it a lot of fun.
Do you go to the Parker House? You go in there
I don't go Friday and Saturdays. That's for the kids. Up? Yeah, we do take the Vespa.
You
park
take
it
the
right
Vespa,
there.
Park it right there.
We go Sunday nights when the kids are gone. We'll go for dinner during the week.
Really?
The scallops are to die for, Tom. I'm telling you.
I've been there when the kids are there. It's
Yes.
a madhouse.
It's a madhouse.
I turned right around. There was no parking, and they were trying to make everything okay, but it was a little crazy.
For those of you worldwide, this is a coast tradition. I mean, this goes really across the nation, but in May it begins with Memorial Day.
Yep.
I've seen sleet up on Cape Cod Memorial Day.
Yeah, I know. Your season up there doesn't start till July 4th, right?
Yeah, well, you know.
That's the thing.
Talk of it, the Sweeney family, good morning.
Yep.
In memory of Casino by the Sea in Falmouth Heights.
Yeah.
Are you related to the Baron and Sweeney's up in Falmouth Heights?
No, I could be. You never know.
Look for Beard and Sweeney. They'll be at the Parker House sometime near 4th of July. Futures up 25, down futures up 228. Michael Barr's like, what in God's name are they
You guys are too highfalutin for me, man. White Castle sliders. That's it right there.
Very good. Thank you for that. The VIX 17.72. Seriously, Paul and I are watching oil $70.45. And we got a 201 in the 10-year real yield. From New York City, Bloomberg surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And this futures report sponsored by IBKR. Will the average U.S. temperature in February 2025 exceed 36 degrees Fahrenheit? At IBKR forecast trader, the yes recently at 44%. What's your take? You can trade your prediction at ibkr.com/forecast. We've got futures advancing this morning. NVIDIA shares on the rise ahead of its earnings this week. It shares up more than 1%, leading the Mag 7 before the bell. Let's get to NASDAQ futures up 0.4%. Same for Dow futures. S&P futures up 0.3%. The 2-year yield 4.22%. That's up 1 basis point, and the yield on the 10-year 4.44%, and that's up 1 basis point. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is little changed. Few companies making news this morning. Salesforce, which mostly relies on Amazon cloud services, well, it signed a multi-billion-dollar cloud deal with Alphabet's Google. And JP Morgan increasing its direct lending efforts by setting aside an additional $50 billion to get a bigger piece of the market. Shares of Robinhood up more than 1%. The company says the SEC has closed an investigation into its cryptocurrency operations and is not looking into any enforcement action. And the question on the Bloomberg Surveillance YouTube page, why doesn't Tom Keene just get a clip-on bow tie? They're asking. They want to know why. Where's the bow tie? You still don't have it.
This is like painful. I'm in a small store on Madison Avenue. It's a French name. And they now make clip-on bow ties. And I said, that's the lowest thing I've seen since 1837. And they actually had a fabric I liked, but I'm not buying a clip-on. I got the Band-Aid. The Band-Aid's off.
Okay, good. Progress.
Vet bills in therapy. You know, I mean, I got bit. And, you know, I'm getting better every day. It's like this doesn't hurt like it hurt a couple days ago. But I think tomorrow we make grace with the bow tie.
There we go.
We have said the last number of days that the absolute must-read within Bloomberg is Robert Schiffman. He's senior credit analyst. We thank him for his time the other day. We couldn't get him today. His people wouldn't let him. No. And he's on fire on a Monday morning. And just on Apple, 3.5 trillion market cap, cash balance 141 billion. They paid out 115 billion last year alone in dividends and buybacks, and the pace is even picking up now. The word he uses is endure.
Yep.
That the Mag 7 cash flows, Paul, will endure.
It's you know, I think when a lot of equity strategists and portfolio managers talk about quality, one of the quality factors they talk about is the quality of the balance sheet. And boy, no wonder these tech names get so much attention from equity investors, because you look at these balance sheets and they're just extraordinary. More than, I mean, he in his coverage alone, which are the Apples, Amazons, Googles, all those things, Alibaba,
right,
$1 trillion of cash on their balance sheets when you take that whole sector. It's just, and we know about their free cash flow, which is just prodigious, and it's fairly darn predictable. And that's what makes up these tech balance sheets. And so when they do decide to go to the debt markets, they do it.
3 phone calls.
3 phone calls. And they do it because they can, not because they need it. And that's what I always told my investment banking clients: raise capital when you can, not when you need it.
What's important here, folks, I use the WACC screen. For those of you with a terminal, I can't say enough about the value. It goes back to Stern Stewart, if you remember what that was. You know, Pat.
Right, sure.
No
Net operating profit after tax.
Very good. Return on invested capital by this calculation. Apple, 55.60%. That Zvi Bodie up at BU never taught that. And Cam down at Duke, you're not teaching that number.
Yeah.
I mean, it's surreal.
Yeah.
The way this is. And that's how Dan Ives gets all ramped up with his bullish call, I guess.
Yeah, and that's why I think you want these companies investing back into their own companies, because that's where you get the highest return. So it's been extraordinary for some of these.
Okay, I'm looking at the market cap. I didn't realize this. This is closing off $1 on the Trump news, but 3.7 trillion. I mean, we're almost on the edge of like a 4 trillion wide. We're not there. Let's not jump the gun, but on Apple.
And the stock, I mean, Apple stock is flat year to date, but it is up about 35% over the past year. So there you go. Let's talk to somebody who does this stuff, right? Is he there?
No, he's not there.
Oh, he's not
we're
there.
getting to the market open here, and then we're going to do it. But,
all right.
All I can say, folks, the price of a terminal, just go to Robert Schiffman. And what he's doing is just absolutely extraordinary. He's just like killing it. It's on like 2 articles a day, lots of fancy charts and all that I don't understand.
Yeah, nice pictures, but
nice pictures. That's
like
the way
that.
you and I are. We'll have to see. Futures were up 28. They're now up 23. Into the opening, the VIX 17.7 at 5. Cross currents, I'd say, with West Texas 70.49. Dollar, we've hardly mentioned, fractionally stronger here today. First thing I looked at, euro dollar 104.66. Stasis in the German elections is a translation. Critically, Japanese yen stronger. 153 down to 150. Japanese yen under 150, stronger yen 149 at 67. We'll do much more on that this week. Right now, Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene, we welcome all of you on YouTube and worldwide with a market opening on a full week. Lisa Mateo.
Yes, finally a full weekend. We have some ground to make up after Friday's sell-off. Let's start with the S&P 500 right now. Up 0.2%, 17 points, 6,031. The Dow up 0.3%, 131 points at 43,579. And we go to the NASDAQ, kicking in up about 0.3%, 67 points at 19,590. We go to the 2-year yield, 4.21%, up 1 basis point. The yield on the 10-year, 4.43%, and that's little change. We go to the Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index. That is little change. And leading the Mag 7 at the open would be NVIDIA. It shares up more than 1.5%. That is your Bloomberg Opening Bell Report. Paul and Tom.
Thanks so much, Lisa. Too short a visit. Anurag Rana joins us now from Bloomberg Intelligence. Why is Microsoft, Anurag Rana, with all your cloud knowledge, why are they in a cloud of trading back to where they were early 2024?
Yeah, I think the biggest news this came over the weekend is somebody's talking about them, scaling back on their expenditure. And from what our understanding is, it's a little bit of reallocation of resources more towards, in our view, less on training, because it seems OpenAI is going more with Oracle and SoftBank. So I think it's just a little bit of noise, but every time Microsoft does something, it really shatters the entire market.
Anurag, also in your world today, Apple out with some news. 20,000 new U.S. jobs, spend $500 billion in U.S. investment. What do you make of all this?
Yeah, I think if you look at Apple Intelligence, what Apple's doing right now with their AI initiative, they're really looking at external partners. When it comes to hosting those servers, they are really going to hyperscalers to rent it out. They're using OpenAI's ChatGPT on Siri. I think this could be an initiative where they want to bring some of that in-house. A. B, I think if they make the administration happy, they are under a lot of regulatory scrutiny over their services app store. I think that could help them out if possible, if they're able to negotiate some deal here.
Are manufacturing jobs in semiconductors different than manufacturing jobs building, quote, servers, unquote?
I think there is a big difference. Almost everything in the semiconductor world would be PhDs trying to figure out how to build the next node or the next chip. So it is an extremely different thing. And I actually feel it's going to be a lot of the R&D centers rather than the where you make stuff, because I think that's pretty much TSMC right now. So I think the investment is going more towards the higher end products rather than the lower end products.
Where's the electricity come from for the new Apple plants?
Yep. Yeah, I think that's going to be, the biggest bottleneck for not just them, all the hyperscale cloud providers that are looking to expand their capabilities. They'll have to something will figure it out. They'll have to figure it out.
Too short a visit. Anurag Rana, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it with BI this morning. Paul, the chart of the weekend for me, I can't remember. I don't think I put it on social. Was the increase in utility bills?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know where, like maybe New Jersey, but it may have been down south. So basically, retail is seeing an increased utility bill because some big tech company needs electricity for servers.
That's what I hear. And
do I have that right?
I think you do, and it's impacting everybody across the board here. So there's certain parts of inflation that just pop up out of kind of nowhere. This was one of them. Auto insurance was probably 6 to 12, 18 months ago. It seems like there's always something that'll just pop up, and you're like, where did that come from?
But if they're developing the free cash flow that we're talking about, why aren't they paying their fair share of the electricity load versus the person three doors down from Lisa Mateo?
I think if they asked them, they would say we're paying a ton more for energy. That's why you see these utility stocks ripping. Kind of a derivative play on AI. Who would have thunk it?
I think that's percolating, folks. We'll have to go to Lisa Mateo. She's in charge of our electric utility bill here at Bloomberg Surveillance. We'll have to see on that as we go. There's green on the screen after the weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, the politics and all. There's a lift. Up 160 points on the Dow, up 23 points on the S&P 500. NASDAQ up 0.2%. Pretty good feeling there. The 10-year real yield is at 2.01%. Lots going on out there. Stay with us on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Good morning.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We have stocks battling back after the worst slide of the year. Comes ahead of NVIDIA earnings on Wednesday. Key inflation data later this week. The NASDAQ, little change, up 12 points. We have the Dow up 0.2%, 119 points. The S&P 500 up 0.2% or 12 points. The two-year yield, 4.21%, up 1 basis point. And the yield on the 10-year, 4.43%. That is little change. The Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index, little changed as well. Shares of Palantir, they're actually heading for a fourth straight day of declines. The shares down 5% this morning. This is after a near 19% pullback in the past 3 sessions. And then as far as companies making news, sources saying Tesla getting ready to unveil this software update for its Chinese customers to bring self-driving capabilities to the market. Tesla shares up 1%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Tom.
Lisa, thanks so much. So what you got to do for Bob Dahl, particularly having Mike Wilson on and then Bob Dahl is great. Bob Dahl with us, the Crossmark Global right now. Bob, you know what I did? I did all Ibbotson. So I go back to what I call the Guadalcanal low of 1942, and you strap out a log Dow Jones Industrial Average, and we're really not all that extended. I mean, we're out 1 standard deviation, but do you see an extension of prices right now? Do you see an exuberance right now that I'm missing?
Well, the way I see the exuberance, if there is any, I think you raised a good question, is about valuation. It's rare we see stocks selling at 22, 23 times earnings unless we're in a recession and have depressed earnings. Earnings are far from depressed, of course, and it's likely that those earnings are going to fall short of expectations.
I look at the total return from that 1942 low, Paul, Dow Jones, 7.7% per year. So there's that single-digit return we're talking about.
Bob, as Tom mentioned, we were just talking to Mike Wilson of Morgan Stanley, and I asked him, how many valuation questions does he get every day? And he says, not many. Is that in and of itself a reason for concern?
It is. I find the same thing when out on the stump talking to financial advisors. Very few questions about valuation. It's more about, the Trump agenda and AI and other subjects that generally they're looking for a positive answer. They don't want to hear the yellow flag of valuation.
So how do you try to frame that valuation discussion as either a headwind, a risk, or maybe not so much?
Yeah, my view is the valuation is a bad short-term indicator. We all know that. But you can look at the long-term returns, 1, 3, 5, 10 years after certain PE ratios, and it's over the 5 and 10 year periods, it's a great indicator. So it doesn't tell us markets are going to have subpar returns starting tomorrow for the next 3 months, but it could mean for the next 3 to 5 years.
What do you do with Mag 7? I mean, Bob, you're too young to remember Nifty 50. But I'm sorry, maybe it's a Nifty 7 is what we ought to call it. Except that's what people own, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of ownership. My accountant recommendation is own some Mag 7, but be underweight those benchmarks. It's a big weighting, as you know. And my fundamental backing is to look at quarterly projections of consensus numbers for the Mag 7 and then the other 493. Mag 7 growth rates are slowing, 493 are rising. That tells me I want to be underweight the Mag 7 and overweight the 493.
All right, we're about 85% of the way through this earnings season here, Bob.
That much. Huh?
What's your takeaway here? What have you heard? What's the guidance kind of suggest to you?
The numbers have been very, very good, with a few notable and visible exceptions, as you know. The banks, the financials out of the gates were just amazing numbers. The problem, in my view, is revenues were up 5%, earnings were up 15%. I can't expect margins to expand at that pace going forward.
Right.
And that's almost what's necessary to make the 2025 and now early 2026 numbers.
Yeah.
They're for strong earnings gains. I think they're overstated.
Bob, we got a crushing market drawdown from the recent high. We're down 2.1%. I'm absolutely just crushing thing. This came up this weekend, and it's a phrase from years ago. Bob Dull, if we get like a 10 or 12% correction, an 8% correction, dare I say 14% south, do shares move from weak hands into strong hands? What does that mean?
So generally, as you know, as we go down, more and more people want to sell. They don't sell at the top. They sell as things are moving down. So it would concern me somewhat. But I come back to not just the valuations, but the fundamentals. Are we in the face now of some sort of growth scare? Whether the scare leads to actual slowing growth, who knows? But when you look at recent housing data and the bad retail sales, the consumer sentiment numbers, the housing data, as I already mentioned, you have to wonder somewhat if things are going to slow down a bit. My guess is they probably will.
Bob Dole, thank you so much for the Crossmark this morning. Just a wonderful way to get Monday started here. The Dow up 103 points. With our news in New York City, Michael Buck.
Thank you very much, Tom. Paul, Lisa. Elon Musk's demand that more than 2 million federal employees defend their work is facing pushback from other powerful figures in the Trump administration. Agencies, including the Pentagon and Department of Justice, have cited potential legal pitfalls and agency autonomy, telling workers to pause on replying to the email. We get details from Bloomberg's Laura Davison in Washington.
these moves are really causing some tension among Trump's key allies. This email went out on Saturday asking federal employees, sort of regardless of job functions, to send these 5 bullet points. This raised a lot of alarm on workers who deal with classified information, law enforcement, anyone who deals with something that wouldn't necessarily be able to go to just some sort of general inbox within the federal government.
Bloomberg's Laura Davison in the nation's capital. It comes as French President Emmanuel Macron meets with President Trump at the White House today. Pope Francis is said to be awake and continuing therapy. Today is the 10th day of his hospitalization for a complex lung infection that has provoked the early stages of kidney failure. He remains in critical condition. In Germany, conservative leader Friedrich Merz emerged as the winner in Sunday's election. According to the preliminary results, Merz's center-right alliance won almost 29% of the vote. A week before the Oscars, a film about the mystery surrounding the selection of a new pope is gaining traction. Conclave won the Screen Actors Guild Top Award for Best Movie Ensemble. Timothée Chalamet took Best Actor for the Bob Dylan biopic, A Complete Unknown.
I know the classiest thing would be to downplay the effort that went into this role and how much this means to me, but the truth is this was 5.5 years of my life. I poured everything I had into playing this incomparable artist, Mr. Bob Dylan.
Demi Moore won Best Actress for The Substance. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul, Lisa.
Now, the surveillance Oscars report. Okay, I got Amelia, A Complete Conclave. I can't pronounce it, Conclave there. Nickel Boys. I'm Still Here. The Substance, Dune Part 2. Wicked, Honora, The Brutalist. It's amazing how out of touch I am. Lisa, weigh in here, please.
I haven't seen so many of these. You're asking the person whose favorite movie is Dumb and Dumber. I love this. Yes, I have not seen. I heard The Brutalist.
Paul, have they lost America? I don't mean it. I'm not being snarky.
I think so. No, yeah. I mean, it's been that way. I'm going to say forever. The Academy looks at art as opposed to box office. And some years those sync up, most years they do not. And there you go.
I remember when Gandhi, fabulous movie, beat E.T. And I was like, you're kidding me.
Yep.
And granted, Gandhi was a fabulous movie.
Yep.
With Ben Kingsley.
Sure.
I don't, help me here, folks. Email in on YouTube Live. Michael Barr, what do you think?
Well, you know how many movies I've seen that are up? None. I haven't, not because, I was like, oh, I'm not going to watch any movies. I just don't have the time.
I don't have the time.
Yeah. I mean, I got stuff to do. I got, once I get off here, I go home, eat, go to sleep, wake back up, do it all over again. So I just don't have the time.
Should Lisa move to Ohio and commute? She's thinking about it.
Yeah, sure.
Better housing market.
She's on the phone on the break, folks, with Francine Lacroix saying, can I get the Gulfstream 3 days a week?
Yeah.
I wish I had that Gulfstream.
I don't, but the whole housing thing is really, it's like front and center.
It is for a lot of people.
I'm hearing it from a lot of
very
people.
Challenging.
A lot of people right now. Let's do this. Green in the streets. Come back a little bit. We're up 200, I think. Now we're up 50 on the Dow. The VIX back above 18.39, showing some of the angst out there that we see today. Is Alex Steele back?
I believe she is.
We believe there's been a sighting.
Yes.
Alex Steele, Paul Sweeney, they'll be looking at Bitcoin, 95,000. From New York City on YouTube, subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts. Good morning.
You're listening to Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene. Thank you for being with us. Paul, I remember not that long ago talking to Ellen Zentner, who's an expert on a consumer in America, and I can't remember the numbers she gave me. This has got to be 90 days ago. Somewhat codified this morning in the Wall Street Journal with a great chart from Moody's Analytics, which is, of course, Dr. Zandi. Real effort, Mark Zandi, to help us here. Doing better, we effort Michael McKee, who joins us this morning. I guess it's on excess savings and it's on the wealth effect, which Alan Greenspan really cared about. The Gilded Age that we live in now, how does the Fed handle this modern Gilded Age that Dr. Zandi talks about in the Wall Street Journal?
Well, they're watching overall spending, obviously, and they do know, and they've brought up the fact that a lot of the spending is being done by the higher income folks who have a wealth effect. It's been an unusual time, as we've said many times in the past, because we came out of the pandemic with a lot of people having high savings because they got checks from the government, and their home prices went up a lot, which gives them the feeling they can spend more. Maybe they take out a home equity loan. Now some of that is falling off, so you would probably see more spending going to the higher income categories.
Yeah, and it's just this dichotomy in the U.S. economy, this K-shaped economy that I think pretty accurately captures what's going on. There's no reason that does not continue, is there?
No, I mean, especially given the policies that they're talking about from the White House of cutting taxes for, they say cut taxes for everybody, but the impact is the greatest for those who have the most money. And if you cut corporate taxes, it's going to increase corporate profits, going to increase stocks prices. So it all works in the direction of the people, them that have gets, as they say.
Exactly. I'm so sorry, folks. I can't cite it. My brain's not working. Mike McKee, what if we don't get tax cuts? Does our world fall apart?
Well, there's a two-part answer to that. One is if we don't get tax cuts, no, the world doesn't fall apart. We continue with where we're going. If they don't renew the tax cuts that they passed in 2017, that's a tax increase for everybody. And the world, I don't know if I'd say fall apart, but the world would look a lot different. It would be a very difficult time if everybody's taxes went up at once. But it gets very complicated because we have there's a lot of stuff in the tax bill that are aimed at specific business provisions that need to be renewed. And so there's a lot of different ways this could work out.
Okay.
All right, Friday, core PCE, annualized basis, 2.6%. That's pretty darn good. I'm patting myself on the back if I'm the Fed, but they feel like they got more work to do, don't they?
Yeah, they want to get it down to 2. They don't want it to stop at 2.6. I mean, it sounds like, well, this is the best since, but it's really only the best since like last May or so when we hit that number and then bounced back up again. But it is seen as progress, which we did not see in the CPI.
How do you respond to Citigroup saying we'll get a rate cut in May? Is this like a real GDP call that all of a sudden the 2.x% is going to drift away and weaker?
I think it's fairly unlikely to get one in May just because of the data. The Fed meeting in May is May 7th, and that should be just right after we get the jobs report. It'll be before we get the CPI report. So we'll get a CPI report and a PCE report, but we won't get as many. That's why a lot of people are thinking if you were going to get it, it would come in June when they've had a time to get more information.
We don't care. The reason we had you in was to ask, do you have Guitar Hero in your house?
Probably, but I've never used it.
I banned it for years, and all of a sudden one day I was ignored by the Offspring, and it showed up. I'm up at 3 a.m. checking the dogs, and Afterthoughts got Warriors of Rock going. I said, well, what are you doing? She's playing Led Zeppelin for Liz Ann Saunders.
Nice.
I said, well, you got to play for Kevin Gordon over at Schwab. You got to play Nickelback. Good morning, everyone.